Hello, let me know where you're from in the world and what time it is after liking this video. The first happened on a case that I went out on right after I got out of training and was still pretty new to everything. Before I took this job, I was a volunteer, so I had a basic idea of what to expect. But on those calls, you're mostly dealing with finding lost people after vets have found signs of them. As an CR officer, you go out for all kinds of cases, from animal bites to heart attacks. This case got called in early in the morning from a young couple who were up on one of the trails that goes by the lake. The husband was completely hysterical, and we couldn't really figure out what was going on. We could hear the woman screaming in the background, and he was begging us to come up there right away. When we get there, we see him holding his wife, and she's got something in her arms. She's screaming these awful, almost animal-like screams, and he's sobbing. He sees us and he screams at us to help them, to please get an ambulance up there. Now obviously we can't just drive an ambulance up the walking path, so we ask him if his wife needs help, or if she can walk on her own. He's still hysterical, but he manages to tell us that it's not his wife that needs help. I go over while one of the vets tries to calm him down, and I ask the wife what's going on. She's rocking, holding something, and just shrieking over and over. I crouch down and see that whatever she's holding, it's covering her with blood. That's when I notice the sling on her front, and my heart sinks. I ask her to tell me what's going on, and I sort of pry her arms gently open so I can see what she's holding. It's her baby, obviously dead. His head is caved in on one side and he's covered in scratches. Now, I've seen dead bodies before, but something about this whole situation hits me hard. I have to take a second to compose myself, and I get up and go get one of the other vets who's standing by. I tell him that it's a dead kid, and he sort of pats my shoulder and tells me he'll deal with it. It took us over an hour to get this woman to let us see her kid. Every time we try to take him from her, she flips out and tells us we can't have him, that he'll be okay if we just leave her alone and let her help him. But eventually, one of the vets manages to calm her down, and she gives us the body. We took it back to the med area, but when the EMTs showed up, they told us that there was never any hope of saving the kid. He died instantly from the trauma to his head. I was good buddies with one of the nurses who met them at the hospital, and she told me later what had happened. Turns out the couple had been walking with the baby in the sling, and they stopped because the kid was fussing. The dad takes the kid and is holding him, looking out over this little gully by the path. The mom comes to stand next to him, but she ends up stepping on a loose patch of soil and she trips. She falls into the dad, who drops the kid, who ends up falling about 20 feet down this little gully onto the rocks at the bottom. The dad climbed down and recovered the kid, but he'd fallen right on his head and was dead by the time he got there. The baby was only about 15 months old. It was a total freak accident, a series of events that coalesced into the worst possible outcome. Probably one of the more awful calls I've been on. I haven't seen a lot of animal bites in my time as an CR officer, mostly because there aren't that many animals that come around the area. While there are bears in the area, they tend to stay pretty far away from people, and sightings are highly unusual. Most of the animals you'll see are small ones, like coyotes, raccoons, or skunks. What we do see frequently, though, are moose. And let me tell you, moose are nasty fuckers. They'll chase after anything for any reason, and God help you if you get in between a female and its baby. One of the more amusing calls was of a guy who'd gotten chased down by an absolutely massive male moose and was stuck up a tree. Took us almost an hour to get him down, and when he was finally on solid ground again, he looks at me and says, "God damn, them fuckers is big up close." I guess that's not really a scary story, but we still laugh about that one. Running. It's the only time I've ever lost my composure like that, but something about it was so incredibly wrong, and neither of us wanted to stay out there anymore. When we got back to the rendezvous, we asked if anyone else had heard anything strange, but no one else knew what we were talking about. I know it sounds sort of anticlimactic, but that call fucked me up for a long time. As for the little girl, we never found a trace of her. We keep an eye out for her and all the other people who we've never found. But frankly, I doubt we'll ever find anything. Of the missing persons calls I've gone out on, only a handful have ever resulted in a complete disappearance, meaning no trace of the person and no body ever found. But sometimes, finding a body just leads to more questions than answers. Here are some of the bodies we've found that have become infamous in our team. A teenage boy whose remains were recovered almost a year after he vanished. We found the top of his skull, 2 finger bones, and his camera almost 40 miles from where he was last seen. The camera, sadly, was destroyed. The pelvis of an older man who had vanished a month earlier. That was all we found. The lower jaw and right foot of a 2-year-old boy on the highest peak of a ridge in the southern part of the park. The body of a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome, almost 20 miles from where she'd vanished. She had died of exposure 3 weeks after going missing, and all of her clothes were intact except for her shoes and jacket. There were berries and cooked meat in her stomach when they did the autopsy. The coroner said it appeared as if someone had been taking care of her. There were no suspects ever identified. The frozen body of a 1-year-old baby, found a week after vanishing in the hollow trunk of a tree 10 miles from the area he was seen last. There was fresh milk found in his stomach, but his tongue was gone. A single vertebra and right kneecap of a 3-year-old girl, found in the snow almost 20 miles from the campground her family had been at the previous summer. Now on to a couple of the stories my friend told me. I mentioned that you were all interested in the stairs and you're in luck. He's had a closer encounter with them. Though he doesn't have any explanation for them, he does have a bit more experience with them than I do. My buddy has been an SAR officer for about 7 years. He started when he was a junior in college, and he had a very similar experience when he first encountered the stairs. His trainer told him almost the same thing mine did, which was to never go near, touch, or ascend them. For the first year, he did just that, but apparently his curiosity got the better of him, and on one call, he broke away from the line and went to go check a set of them out. He said they were about 10 miles from the path where a teenage girl had vanished, and the dogs were following a scent. He was on his own, lagging behind the main group, when he saw a set of stairs off to his left. They looked like they were from a new house because the carpeting was pristine and white. He said that as he got closer, he didn't feel any different or hear any weird noises. He was expecting something to happen, like bleeding from his ears or collapsing, but he got right up next to them and didn't feel anything. The only thing, he said, that was odd was that there was absolutely no debris on the steps, no dirt, leaves, dust, anything, and there didn't appear to be any signs of animal or insect activity in the immediate area, which he found strange. It was less like things were avoiding them, and more like they just happened to be in a relatively barren part of the forest. He touched the stairs and didn't feel anything except that sort of sticky feeling you get from new carpet. Making sure his radio was on, he slowly climbed the stairs. He said it was terrifying, because the way they'd been stigmatized, he wasn't really sure what was going to happen to him. He joked that half of him expected to be teleported to some other dimension, and the other half was watching for a UFO to come swooping down. But he got to the top with little event, and he stood there looking around. But, he said, the longer he stood on the top step, the more he felt like he was doing something very, very wrong. He described it as the feeling you'd get if you were in a part of a government building you have no business being in, as if someone was going to come and arrest you or shoot you in the back of the head at any second. He tried to brush it off, but the feeling got stronger and stronger, and that's when he realized that he couldn't hear anything anymore. The sounds of the forest were gone, and he couldn't hear his own breathing. It was like some kind of weird, awful tinnitus, but more oppressive. He climbed back down and rejoined the search and didn't mention what he'd done. But, he said, the weirdest part came after. His trainer was waiting back at the welcome center after the search ended for the day, and he cornered my buddy before he could leave. He said his trainer had this look of intense anger, and he asked what was wrong. "You went up them, didn't you?" My buddy said it wasn't phrased as a question. He asked how his trainer knew. The trainer just shook his head. "Because we didn't find her. The dogs lost her scent." My buddy asked what that had to do with anything. The trainer asked how long he'd been on the stairs, and my buddy said no more than a minute. The trainer gave him this really awful, almost dead-eyed look, and told him that if he ever went up another set of stairs again, he'd be fired, immediately. The trainer walked away, and I guess he's never answered any of the questions my buddy has asked him about it since. My buddy has been involved in a lot of missing persons cases where there's never been a trace of them found. I mentioned David Paulides, and my buddy said he can confirm that those stories are, for the most part, accurate. He said that most of the time, if the person isn't found right away, they're either never found, or they're found weeks, months, or years later, in places they can't possibly have gotten to. One story he told me really stood out that involved a 5-year-old boy with a severe mental disability. The little boy vanished from a picnic area in the late fall. In addition to the mental disability, he was also physically handicapped, and his parents explained over and over that he simply could not have vanished. It was impossible. Someone had to have taken him. My buddy said they searched for this kid for weeks, going miles out of the accepted range, but it was like he'd never been there. The dogs couldn't pick up his scent anywhere, not even in the picnic area where he'd apparently vanished from. Suspicion fell on the parents, but it was pretty clear that they were devastated and hadn't done anything sinister to their kid. The search was concluded about a month later, and my buddy said everyone had pretty much forgotten it by later in the winter. He was out on a training op in the snow, on one of the higher peaks, when he came across something in the snow. He said he saw it from far away at first, and when he got closer, he realized it was a shirt, frozen and sticking part way out of the powder. He recognized it as belonging to the kid, because it had a distinctive pattern. About 20 yards away, he found the kid's body, laying partially buried in the snow. My buddy said there was no way the kid had been dead for any more than a few days, even though he'd been missing for almost 3 months. The kid was curled around something, and when my buddy brushed off the snow to see what it was, he said he almost couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a big chunk of ice that had been carved crudely to look sort of like a person. The kid was holding it so tight that it had frostbitten his chest and hands, which my buddy could tell even with the decay that had taken place. He radioed the rest of the crew, and they took the body off the mountain. Now, he recapped all of this for me, and to put it simply, there was no way this kid could have both survived for almost 3 months on his own, or have gotten to this peak. There was no physical way this child could have walked almost 50 miles, and ended up on the top of a goddamn mountain. To top it off, there was nothing in the kid's stomach or colon. Nothing. Not even water. It was like my buddy said, the kid had been taken off the face of the earth, put in suspended animation, and dropped on this mountain months later, only to die of exposure. He's never really gotten over that one. The last story I'll share from him was one that took place relatively recently, only a few months ago. They were out doing a recon for mountain lions because there had been several reports of sightings in the last couple of days. One of our jobs is to scout out the areas where these animals are seen to ensure that if they are in the area, we can warn people and close off those trails. He was out on his own in a very heavily forested part of the park toward dusk when he heard what sounded like a woman screaming in the distance. Now, as most of you know, when a mountain lion screams, it sounds almost exactly like a woman being brutally murdered. It's unsettling, but far from abnormal. My buddy radioed back and let ops know that he'd heard one, and that he was going to keep going to see if he could figure out where its territory started. He heard the mountain lion scream a couple more times, always from the same spot, and determined the approximate area of the mountain lion's territory. He was about to head back when he heard another scream, this time within only a few yards of him. Of course, he freaks out and starts heading back at a much faster pace, because the last thing he wants is to run into a goddamn mountain lion and get mauled to death. As he got back on the path and started heading back, the screaming followed him, and he broke into a jog. When he was about a mile from ops, the screaming stopped, and he turned around to see if it was following him. It was almost night by this point, but he said in the distance, just before the path rounded a corner, he could see what looked like a male figure. He called out to them, warning them that the paths were closed and that he needed to come back to the welcome center. The figure just stood there, and my buddy started to walk over. When he was about 10 yards away, the figure took, as he described, an impossibly long step toward him and let out the same scream my buddy had been hearing. My buddy didn't even say anything, he just turned and sprinted back to ops, never looking behind him. By the time he got back, the screaming had moved back into the woods. He didn't mention it to anyone else, just said that there was a mountain lion in the area and that they would need to close those paths until the animal could be located and moved. The previous tenant of my new flat left a survival guide. I'm not sure I want to live here anymore. I moved in with my boyfriend yesterday. We've been together for 5 years now, and we're old and wise enough to settle down and finally leave our parents' houses. He just turned 24, and I'm 22. He's the love of my life. His name is Jamie, and I couldn't be happier to be living with him. When we decided to make the leap, we spent 2 months looking at flats and houses we couldn't afford to buy yet, so renting was our only option, but the prices were astronomical. For our budget, we would have been lucky to get a box room and a stove. Jamie works for a local 24-hour fast food restaurant, and I'm training to be a teacher. The early stages of training don't pay much, and I owe a lot in student loans, so finances are tough. We had almost given up hope until we found our flat. It was nothing special, but to us it was a palace. A spacious 2-bedroom apartment with views of a city park, a balcony, and local conveniences. It was in a tower block in a not-so-nice area, but neither of us had been wealthy growing up. We weren't fussy, just grateful to be together. The advert was sweetened by the deposit-free option and open-ended tenancy. The landlord was happy to sign a 5-year contract if we wanted. That sort of thing never happens in the city. We were told that along with no deposit, we would also have no inspections, but would be liable to pay for any damage when we ended the tenancy. I'd never heard of anything quite like it. We knew that for our budget and location, we weren't going to get any better. We snapped the place up fast, not even bothering to view it. It felt like our only chance. Move-in day rolled around quickly, and yesterday we got the keys to our first home together. It was such a strange feeling. The day was chaos, getting our stuff in and up in the lift. We were flat number 42 on the 7th floor. The items we couldn't get in the lift had to be taken up all the stairs by the removal men. I think they were grateful we weren't any higher, but I still wish we had been able to give them a better tip. In the evening, we settled down on our second-hand sofa, given to us by a cousin of a friend, and watched some TV. We smoked cigarettes on the balcony looking at the park and fell asleep on our mattress on the floor super early because we had no energy to put the bed together yet, and Jamie had work at a hideous time of the morning. We slept soundly last night. I felt safe and happy. I don't think that feeling is coming back anytime soon, and it's all due to the note I found this morning. I found it in the kitchen, having a coffee, hours after Jamie had left for his early shift at work. It was in one of the cupboards that were fixed to the wall. There were a bunch of useful items from the previous tenant. Spare keys to the flat, a set of tiny keys that locked and unlocked the windows, necessary for those with kids this high up, spare smoke alarm batteries, and a folded-up piece of paper. The note was handwritten with "New occupier of flat 42" in beautiful cursive on the blank side. I opened it up and sat down to read. I can't really describe it to you, so I'm going to copy it out below. Dear new occupier, firstly, welcome to your new home. I lived here before you for 35 years with my husband. Unfortunately, he had an incident at home recently that I'd rather not discuss that claimed his life. My sister has now decided I can't keep up with the demands of the property and has insisted that I move in with her and her husband. I was reluctant at first, but the stairs do kill me at my age, and without Bernie, it's filled with sadness. Anyway, when you've lived somewhere for as long as I have, it feels like a person that you know. You understand its personality and what makes it tick. I thought it was probably pertinent that I impart some of that knowledge on you. It's a wonderful home, honestly. I have lived through best and worst years, and leaving it behind is very emotional. But if you are to survive and get the best out of it, then there are some steps you need to follow. 1. The landlord will never bother you. He doesn't visit, call, or communicate in any way. But make sure to pay your rent in a timely fashion always. I have only dealt with him once in 35 years, and let's just say I never missed another rent day. Any repairs required, you speak to the agent you rented the place with. 2. Do not use the communal lift between 1:11 and 3:33 a.m. Just don't do it. This step is vital if you are to have a happy life here. It really is life or death. Don't do it. This has cost me and many others in the building greatly, and I would rather not elaborate on why you shouldn't do this. Just please don't do it. I cannot stress this enough. 3. When you hear the strange animal noises coming from flat 48, don't question it. Mr. Prentice lives there and he's a lovely chap. Don't be afraid to say hello to him in the corridor or on the stairs. He's old school, so he never risks the lift. But whatever you do, don't check on him when you hear the noises. You'll know when you hear them. 4. If you ever come across a window cleaner on the balcony, ignore him. He may seem like the nicest fellow you've ever had trying to sell you something at the door, but it really is best that you don't engage. He will go away if you ignore him. But he tries pretty hard the first few times, so you'll need some resilience. Whatever you do, don't offer him anything. No money, no hot drink. 5. Don't leave food scraps out. Bin or refrigerate them immediately. If you have small animals, it is imperative that you watch them eat and take away any leftover food immediately after they are done. This and Rule 2 go hand in hand. The things forage all day and seem to really love animal feed. You don't want them in your flat, I promise. You can leave what you want out between 1:11 and 3:33 a.m., so you may want to feed your pets then. 6. Don't communicate with any neighbors who claim to come from flats 65 to 72. These flats suffered a fire in the late 80s that devastated the whole floor. All the residents died in their homes. The building was mostly council-owned at the time, and they never bothered to renovate the flats. They've been empty ever since, but every now and again someone will knock at your door claiming to live in one of these flats and ask to borrow some sugar. They will seem entirely average, but you must shut and lock the door immediately. I installed 2 extra security bolts to avoid these fuckers. I don't like to swear at my age, but they really are fuckers. 7. Simple one for you here. Keep a weapon in each room. Sometimes you follow all these steps and something still slips through the net. Better to be safe than sorry. 8. The building has a committee that will try and get you to join. It's one of those neighbors groups about improving living conditions for all residents. It's a nice group, and the lady who runs it, Terry from Flat 26, is a fantastic neighbor. By all means, get involved. But I wouldn't recommend babysitting Terry's 2 children. She'll ask you because the poor woman needs a break. But if you accept, don't say, I didn't warn you. 9. Stray hairless cats sometimes roam in the hallway. I know they're supposedly a special expensive breed, but they don't belong to anyone. They're mostly harmless, but don't pick them up. Not unless you see one of those neighbors that claims to live in 65 to 72. Then grab the cat and lock it inside with you. It'll burn your skin a little, but the cats are friendly and I wouldn't want to see them hurt. 10. There is no way to fix the damp patch on the ceiling in the bedroom. Sometimes it will turn a deep crimson and look quite concerning, but please try not to be alarmed. It doesn't drip, it doesn't get any bigger, and it's been there longer than I have. The landlord won't budge on it, according to the agents. I flagged it many times, even called the police the first night it changed color, but it was a waste of time, and it will be for you too. It's best to ignore it. 11. You can trust the postman. His name is Ian Flanders, and he's been the postman since before I moved in. He has his own key to the main door and delivers post to the door every morning at 8:54. I can't include everything here, or it would become a novel, but if you have any questions, Ian will help you. 12. Finally, the first few weeks are the worst. You'll feel like you've made a mistake. I'm sure reading this you already do. But if you can get through the first few weeks, it really is a lovely block to live in. Every property has its quirks, and this one is a little extra special. But you can be truly happy here if you just take my advice. I wish you all the best, I really do. Yours truly, Mrs. Prudence Hemmings. I don't really know what to think after reading the note. Hopefully it was some sort of joke, but the agent had said the previous tenant was an elderly lady, and I can't see anyone named Prudence Hemmings attempting to play practical jokes on someone they'd never met. There were also parts of the note I couldn't disprove. There was indeed a large damp patch above the bed that me and Jamie had already discussed reporting. No crimson, but it definitely existed. I had also commented on a beautiful Sphinx cat roaming the halls as we were moving in. I started to get seriously freaked out. Our dream, Our beautiful little home had just become a source of fear and confusion. I checked the time and it was 9:14. Damn it. Out of time to catch Postman Ian. When I opened the door to check, sure enough, 2 letters addressed to a Mrs. Hemming sat on the doorstep. At about 11:15, my worst fears were truly confirmed when a friendly, middle-aged looking man carrying window cleaning equipment knocked on my balcony door. I ignored him. I didn't want to take the risk until I'd spoken to Jamie and showed him the note. I'd texted him already to rush home. I felt bad as the man rapped his knuckles against the door for over 10 minutes. But honestly, the longer it went on, the more I was terrified. My windows were sparkling, and due to our lack of curtains, I couldn't even hide from his gaze. I felt so exposed. He stayed for a total of 30 minutes exactly, and never once did he stop looking at me or knocking. He shouted the occasional ultra-friendly line or humble request for a beverage in the heat through the door, but I did my best to avoid eye contact. When he finally left, I looked outside every window in the flat, but I couldn't see him on any of the other balconies or see any equipment suggesting he was around. He had vanished completely. Jamie still hadn't texted me back. He must have been having a rough shift. It was a Friday and they were always busy. It wasn't often that he didn't reply. He was due home in around an hour anyway. I read the note probably hundreds of times over. I tortured myself reading it for the next hour, desperately waiting for Jamie to come through the door to tell me it was all crazy and I should relax. I hoped for that so much, but Jamie never came. His shift should have finished around midday, but by 2 p.m. he still wasn't home. I panicked. I cried. I left over 100 voice messages on his phone but got nowhere. I finally decided it had been long enough that calling his work wouldn't embarrass him, and his boss told me that he had never turned up for his shift. I thought about it. What could have happened? And then it hit me. Jamie's shift started at 4 a.m. today. He would have left the flat at 3:15 and taken the lift down the stairs. I don't know what to do. I've tried to convince myself it was all just a big joke. Maybe Jamie wrote the note and got his boss in on it. A voice in my head kept telling me that he couldn't write like that if he tried, but I had to attempt to fool myself. It's getting late and he still isn't home. What if it's all true? I think we made a big mistake. The previous tenant left a survival guide. How did we end up here? Derek smiled at Ellie, a genuine warm grin. They had never met before. He only knew about the twins because I had told him about them last time we spoke. He never got a chance to see them before he disappeared. Despite this, he was completely unfazed by her demonic appearance. I wished more than anything that the circumstances had been better. Their meeting and our reunion would have been wonderful upstairs, but instead we were stuck in the artificially lit stairwell with the now still again woman for company. I'd missed him. I hadn't realized how much it was possible to miss a person I barely knew until Derek. He represented everything good about the block to me. He made it feel like home, even in the bright, windowless underground layers. "Pleased to meet you too, sir," Ellie answered in the poshest accent that she could muster, giggling. She radiated a light. There was an invisible expression of instant trust amongst the black that made up her voids. She liked him. When this nightmare began, with the prophecy and subsequent death of Esther Beckman, I never would have imagined I'd be witnessing that moment between Ellie and Derek, to see an instant connection. I hoped he would get the chance to see her in the sunlight too, with her brown puppy dog eyes in place of the voids. The whole scene filled me with my own warmth. Sounds were still muffled after my brutal attack by the mangled people, and I was disappointed that his voice wasn't clear, but the arrival of Derek gave me great hope. Even the presence of the woman who was still stood by the stairwell couldn't break that. Besides, we were safe from her now. He took his kindly eyes away from Ellie to look at me. "Why are you here?" "How?" he asked, disbelief in his tone. There was no anger, just disappointment, which was arguably worse. It was the first time I had ever seen Derek not look calm and collected. "I'm here for you. I couldn't let you rot down here. I got the kittens and the vine. Then Albert came to visit." I blurted out quickly. Derek smiled a little, but it was strained. "I'm sorry, Kat. You shouldn't have come here. How did you do it? Why is this little lady with you?" He replied, confusion building. He tried to hide the concern in his voice for Ellie's sake, but it was useless. She'd already seen the danger we were in. I explained what had happened right from the very beginning, after he went away, and Mr. Prentice trampled Prudence. Ellie stood in a frightened awe as I spoke about my monstrous boyfriend, how I'd bought him back, kept him locked away for months, and how he later murdered Mr. Meow. Derek looked worried as I described Albert's visit and threats. I covered everything, from Essie to the vine, to the window cleaner, and his inability to hold it together in lockdown. I tried to reason why I had thought that my plan with the lift would work, but saying it out loud made me realize how stupid I had been. Ellie continued to listen intently. She looked a little smug when I told him how she had saved me from the creatures, and again from the mangled people just a few floors above us. I could see that my explanation wasn't complete enough. Derek had a million questions still to ask, but I didn't give him a chance. After months of dwelling on his disappearance and the events of recent weeks, it was my turn to ask questions. "Where are we?" I asked, starting as simply as I could manage. Little did I know I had just opened Pandora's box with 3 words. Derek began to speak. "I call it the Undertower, or the building below. It's still a part of the building, but most residents never see it, for good reason. The things that live here aren't always as friendly as those upstairs. When my father bought the land to build this place, he discovered a large underground tunnel system whilst digging the foundations, and it inspired him. He wanted to be the first architect to extend a skyscraper the same length downwards, and a good deal of the excavation was already in place. He wanted to maximize the earning potential of his space, but he hadn't accounted for the power of this land. My father was a competitive, secretive man, so naturally he told no one outside of his workers what he was planning, not even his family. He employed a team of contractors who all signed non-disclosure agreements. We're standing in the result." Derek waved his arms a little, gesticulating about our current setting before he continued. "When they found him hanging, he was in the basement, the grim-looking room you will have arrived here in. That room, and everything below it, has been untouched since construction. They gave up on expanding that particular floor, and when my father died, the underground project was abandoned. As is the nature of this land, the contractors started to report strange happenings across the entire tower. There were at least 5 unexplained deaths, and although it was unreported to the public, those were all amongst men working below. Those that worked on this hidden part of the building were especially superstitious, and after my father's death, they sealed all entrances to the basement, entombing an entire tower block underneath the city. When it came into his possession, Albert tried to convince the builders to unseal it and carry on working. He was just like our dad, you see, ambitious and money-driven. None of them would agree to it. They claimed it was cursed. The upper tower was completed just before my father took his life, so Albert abandoned his negotiations with the contractors within a few weeks and focused on opening the place up. He wasn't going to continue to miss out on any money arguing over these lower floors. He said that our father's death would only explain the grand opening being delayed for so long, and he had to move forward. We moved in a week later, the first residents to live here." He paused for a moment, and a sadness clouded his face. His kindly eyes welled up a little as he thought back to life before the building. "You must be really old if your dad built this place. Even my mum isn't that old," Ellie interrupted. I laughed. Her childish thought process was the only thing that could lighten the mood. Derek chuckled, and the woman next to him remained unmoving. "I am quite old, I suppose. Don't feel it, though," he answered, chuckling to himself as he adjusted his flat cap and winked at Ellie. "Don't look it either," I chimed in. Derek stopped chuckling and continued, shooting me a look. "That isn't something I can explain, Kat. Albert and I weren't close to our father. We didn't really know anything about this place until he died. The project was mostly completed, and we only got to speak to a handful of contractors who told us wild stories we would never believe to be true at the time. We couldn't have imagined how our lives were going to change. The only clue we have to our extended life is his note. To my boys, if you stay here, you will never die. That was all he left us, on a crumpled bit of paper that had to be given to us by a builder named Keith. My best guess is that he made some kind of deal with the spirit of the place. I don't know. Maybe it was just a special resident I haven't met yet. Maybe the building itself. It took us years to realize we weren't aging normally, and by time we noticed, there was no one left to ask. We had to navigate every supernatural, unusual, and strange occurrence in the place, alone at first. I remember exploring, being in awe of everything I met. Whenever I would cross paths with Albert, he didn't look mystified like I was, he was scared. My brother and I were never the best of friends, and it's my deepest regret that I didn't use that time we were alone here to build a relationship with him. Maybe I could have made a difference. A difference to what? I asked, trying to take in each of his words. To his son? Derek looked at Ellie, letting his eyes linger on the little girl and then back at me. He shook his head. Not now. There's far too much to discuss. For now, we need to find a way to get you home. I considered protesting, but I could see the sadness in his eyes, and I didn't want to press. He was right. I'd put Ellie at risk for long enough, and I needed to get her back to Terry and Eddie safely. Have you been here this whole time? If you can't get out, then we have no hope. I whispered to Derek as he put an arm around Ellie's shoulders and prepared to move. He sighed a little. You met my brother Kat. The consequences of my escape would be huge for the block. He's not appreciative of the way I conduct myself. He prefers to take what the building gives and make it harmful, twist it into something bad. I prefer to live with it. I don't believe anything here is evil, except maybe him. I tried to let it go. I wanted to keep moving, but things weren't adding up. But Albert said, the kittens and the vine. He said they were a cry for help. He lied. It's in his interest to keep me away. Yes, I helped them live. It gets lonely down here. When he discovered the plant, he took it off me immediately. Albert bought down one of the cats to feed to the thing he keeps on floor -10. I stopped him. He let me keep it because I suppose somewhere deep down he pitied me. I nurtured that little cat until out of nowhere the kittens were born. It was amazing. Love created new life. The cats were great company, and I would have freed them if I could, but I never let them out. I didn't have a clue how they got out until you mentioned a grate in the wall. He looked me up and down as he spoke, eyeing me unusually. It wasn't an entirely mistrustful look, but suspicious nonetheless. So how do we get out? Ellie asked. Well, last time your friend's garden got me out of here. He crouched to speak to her on eye level. We planted a garden for you, but you never came. She huffed in retort. I know. My mean brother told me how beautiful it is. I hope I get to see it one day. He's made it a bit harder this time. He stood up and addressed me again. I used to go through the basement. There's a stairwell. It's just sealed up, you have to break it. The lift will only bring you down, you can't get home that way. So let's go, I urged, reaching for his hand. Then I saw it. I hadn't noticed. I had been too focused on his kindly eyes. Derek was missing all 4 fingers on his left hand. He looked at the floor as I struggled not to stare. What he did to Jamie. If I even just enter the basement, it will happen to me. I tested it. You can see the results. He lifted his stumpy hand. I don't know how I got that cat to give birth. And I don't know how Albert does anything that he does to the things that live here. I just know that if I step in that basement, I'll die. He looked devastated. Despite the relief that he hadn't gone straight in and done much worse damage, I knew the loss of his fingers would be major for him. He was, after all, first and foremost a gardener. I'll walk you there, Cat. Make sure Albert lets you go, but I can't come with you. I wanted to scream, loud enough to hurt any ears left on the mangled people upstairs. I wanted to shout and tell him that after all I'd been through, I wasn't going to leave without him. But the horned little girl beside me had thrown a lot of complications out there. Defeated, I nodded. Derek turned to the still woman. I'll be back to visit Angela, I promise. But please let these ladies leave safely. He leaned over and kissed her cheek gently before ushering us towards the stairwell. Another single tear rolled down her face. We trudged upwards, fairly silently. I wondered if all my questions would ever be answered. I knew from before that Derek was mysterious, But after all I'd been through to get to the undertower, it didn't seem fair that I would be marched back so unceremoniously. Derek may have known the way to get home, but no single person has complete control of this land. I was coming to really understand that. The building would always win. So I shouldn't have been surprised when we arrived at the large black -7. "Cat, they skip. You know that. There's nothing for you in there." Derek put his stumpy hand on my shoulder as I stared at the different yet familiar corridor. He could see the curiosity filling my eyes as I was confronted with the counterpart of my home. Would it be filled with more mangled people? Or was it a true reversal, a place where me and Jamie lived happily, Mr. Prentice didn't have to deal with his affliction, and Essie was alive? Or was it home to something entirely different? Noise suddenly became more than just muffled. My mind was actively blocking it out. The knowledge that Derek was with Ellie took away some of the responsibility that I felt as I edged towards the familiar, yet very different main entrance. "Cat, please don't." Derek followed me, cautious to keep hold of Ellie. I think had she not been there, he probably would have grabbed me, but he didn't want to spook her. I continued forward in a trance-like state. -42. The numbers were blurred, and the minus symbol stood out. I stroked the wood and the handle. It didn't feel like home, not even a little. I was curious about what was inside, but I somehow knew that it wasn't good. The only seemingly positive thing about the situation was the lack of mangled people on the floor. I didn't know what was behind the doors, but it wasn't them. I had already created enough noise to draw them out if they were there. No, something else was there. Instead of trying my key after a sudden epiphany, I turned and ran, straight towards number -51 and pounded on the door. "Essie!" I screamed, realizing that if I hadn't died in that lift, then maybe she hadn't either. I banged hard on the door and could almost smell the familiar cigarette smoke seeping out of the flat. "Cat, stop!" Derek screamed. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see him covering Ellie's voids in grim anticipation. Then the door squeaked open. There she was. Essie hadn't died at all. Her fate had been so much worse. My friend was stood at the door, face twisted into a horrifying expression, her mouth lulled open much wider than should be possible with a functioning jaw. More alarmingly, her eyes had been entirely removed, leaving red, bloodied, gaping wounds central to her face. Tufts of hair had been yanked from her scalp, leaving raw skin in its place. The dress that's neatness I had previously marveled at was torn and distressed around the edges, barely covering her swollen, deformed limbs, bones jutting out of open wounds in all directions. The air filled with the scent of old ash and necrotic skin. She collapsed to the ground, unable to stand any longer on her broken legs, mouth still hanging open. Guilt washed hard over me. "How could you leave her like this?" I turned to Derek and screamed, but his face was as horrified as mine. "I didn't know, Kat. Honestly, I didn't. I didn't even know she was dead until I found you. Please, we have to keep going. Don't let her see this." He kept his hand over the gaping black voids that were so much more alive and comforting than Essie's hollowed sockets. There was real shock in his eyes. I believed him, but I was angry. "She wanted me to help you. And this is what she got?" I couldn't get past my rage. Essie had been left to suffer for so long already, and who knew how long Albert intended her to stay like that? She laid there, writhing, and I was both desperate to help her and furious. Derek didn't get a chance to protest. Instead, our argument was interrupted by a slow and mocking clap. I turned to see the door of flat -42 flung wide open, Albert in the doorway, with a smug grin on his face. The previous tenant left a survival guide. Never take the sunlight for granted. Derek and I stared at Ellie in silence. It wasn't a stare of horror, more of sheer disbelief. I couldn't be more grateful that she had saved our lives. What remained of Albert on the floor wasn't a source of alarm. Despite his extended life, she had ripped him into enough pieces that if he had survived, he couldn't speak and must have been in unbelievable pain. Just like the residents he tortured for years. It would have been a cruel irony, and I almost half hoped he hadn't truly died, as sick as that may sound. "Are you okay?" I asked Ellie. She had shrunken and morphed back into a smaller demonic child. something that I felt a need to protect, despite the fact she didn't need anyone to do so. "I'm fine," she answered, head still hung as if she were ashamed. There was a pause for a moment. "Thank you, sweetheart. We'd all be dead without you." Derek chipped in, his normal calm and positive tone restored. Ellie lifted her head and smiled as he recognized her for the hero she was. It wasn't that I didn't feel the same, it's just that the shock was overwhelming. "We need to help another friend now, honey. Do you want to grab Kat and come with me?" Ellie wrapped her clawed hand in mine as I clutched Derek's blood-soaked tweed cap with the other. She looked at me with love, just like she had at the beginning of this nightmare. The cold atmosphere of the floors below that we stood in had been reduced to a pile on the ground, just like Albert. We walked towards flat -51. Every step felt wobbly, like those few steps after a really spinny ride at the fair. I struggled to put one foot in front of the other. Derek dropped to where Essie lay squirming and put a gentle hand over her chest, carefully avoiding the splintered rib bones that stuck out. "I'm so sorry," he said to her as he shut his eyes, leant down and kissed her bloodied forehead. The shards of bone that decorated her entire body started to move and rearrange. She squealed in pain as her skin started to cauterize over the newly repositioned bone and innards. Her twisted limbs started to resemble something human again. I felt tears rolling down my face. Once she was as close to her usual herself as she was going to get, Derek took a step back as she opened her eyes, that had returned to the hollowed sockets, and looked directly at me. Essie was blind. She had always been blind, but she knew that I was there. We held her gently as the three of us helped her to her sofa, an exact replica of the one upstairs, placing each bruised limb into position as carefully as we could. The bruises shone purple and green underneath the harsh artificial lighting, reminding me that we weren't really home. "Kat," she struggled to speak. Her jaw hadn't quite relocated the whole way. I knew what she wanted, though. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a slightly bloody cigarette. Essie reached out with broken fingers and held it to her lips as best she could as I put down the flat cap and lit it for her. "Come on, sweetheart, we're going to stand in the other room," Derek said to Ellie as he ushered her into the hallway and away from the smoke, leaving me alone with Ms. Beckman. "I'm sorry, Essie," I started. She tried to reply, but she could barely make a sound. "You were right, though. He did need help. Now no one in the block is going to go through what you have anymore. I'm sorry I couldn't save you." Essie puffed on the cigarette with great difficulty. She could barely close her lips around it, but she persisted, with a glint in her eye that indicated this was the first pleasure she'd enjoyed in quite some time. She grunted a strained no at me. "Ellie did it. I can finally take her home now. I just wish that we could take you and Derek with us." I lit my own cigarette and took a long draw from it. "You can, no, not me. Go home, go home," she managed, every word leaving a trail of pain in her face. I cringed. Despite her better appearance, she wasn't fixed. She was in as much pain as she had been before. I smiled at her, just to try and make her feel a little normal. "Speaking in fucking riddles again, Essie?" I responded, trying to muster a laugh through the tears that continued to fill my eyes. She looked directly at me again, and I knew that she had been serious. We finished our smoke in silence as I wept and she wheezed. "Derek!" I shouted after a few more minutes with her, encouraging him back into the flat. Him and Ellie appeared within seconds. He took one look at me, nodded with tears in his eyes too, and he knew what to do. I got up from the sofa and pulled Ellie in for a hug, careful to avoid her horns, making sure that she faced me. Then I watched over her shoulder as he delicately closed Essie's eyelids, and the wheezing stopped. I held in a sob and clutched my young friend as tightly as I could. Derek walked towards us and put his arms around the both of us for a moment in silent mourning before stepping back. Ellie looked up at me, a knowing in her voids, and she spoke. "I want to go home now, Kat." Her words broke what was left of my resolve. The sobbing began and Derek put his hand on my shoulder. He started to walk us out of the hallway, and as we reached the mess on the floor that had once been Albert, outside the door of flat -42, I came to a sudden stop. "No further. We need to go in there," I said, directing them into the open door of my anti-flat. Derek tried to speak and protest, but I stopped him the moment he opened his mouth. "Please, just trust me." I wasn't angry or frantic like before, and I think that he knew I wasn't trying to lead us into more trouble. I recognized that I'd probably done enough of that to last a lifetime. Essie hadn't led me astray before. Her advice had been sound. I'd taken a few detours, but I got to the right place eventually. If I were to respect her death, then I had to follow the last bit of advice she gave out. The flat was familiar. My sofa, fold-out table, and kitchen were all there, identical to the ones I'd spent so much time at. The flat was windowless, the sole indication in my confusion that I wasn't truly home. I pulled back the curtains of the balcony doors to reveal thick concrete behind them. It was sad, really, but I almost longed to see the window cleaner tapping on the glass and begging to be let in. I would trade his persistent harassment for my current predicament in a heartbeat. I felt my face sink. Whatever Essie had wanted me to see here wasn't as clear as I'd hoped. I should have anticipated that it wouldn't be easy. Derek and Ellie stood in silence as I inspected every inch of the place, even down to an equally smashed copy of the prison I had kept Jamie in. Frustrated, I eventually looped back into the living room, prepared to walk out the front door and follow Derek to the basement entrance, where he would leave us again. The prospect of going through all that, for him to remain trapped in these layers, was more disheartening than anything I'd felt before. Then I saw the light. It wasn't a eureka moment, or some sort of religious epiphany. It was an actual physical light. It wasn't artificial like the one that had plagued our stay in the Undertower. It was real, and it was coming from the sun. "How?" Derek uttered in wonder as his eyes fixed on the grate that had appeared at the top of the concrete, behind the sliding balcony doors. The sun flooding in lit up his whole face and electrified his kind eyes. The opening looked just the same as it had the night I found the kittens, but from the other side, its appearance was all the more poignant. Who would have thought that metal bars could signify such freedom? When it first appeared, I had never imagined that something other than a basement could exist beneath the block. "Thank you, Essie." I looked up at the ceiling and imagined her smile as it had been before Albert had got to her. She knew she couldn't be saved, but she made sure Derek didn't have to stay. And I knew that in her death, she wouldn't have to suffer again. The grate was just large enough for a person to fit through with enough of a squeeze, and I could almost make out the shrubbery me and the twins had planted. "See? You're coming too!" I grinned at Derek with the first bit of true joy I'd felt in quite some time. He didn't protest this time, or argue at all. He smiled back and just said two simple words. "Thank you." I pulled open the sliding door and Ellie, who had been stood to the side, climbed the curtain with her claws as quickly as possible. I was amazed and grateful that she didn't pull them down. I watched in awe as she wrenched the bars away from the concrete and uninterrupted sunlight poured into the lower flat. The sunlight bathed us all, and Ellie dropped to the ground the same time as her claws and horns began to retract. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment the voids disappeared, but they did. There she was, mess of blonde hair on her head and brown puppy dog eyes looking at us as she hit the ground with a thud. A little girl you wouldn't suspect more than a tantrum of replaced the ferocious beast that had protected me through this hellish landscape. The front door that led to the hallway where Albert's remains laid had suddenly been replaced by a thick blank wall, just as the lift that brought us here had been. All that remained was the flat, the three of us, and the open grate. I pulled one of the chairs from the fold-out table below it and turned to Derek. "You first, so you can pull us out." He was busy staring at the newly transformed girl. There was a guilt in his eyes, and he looked at Ellie more strangely than he had when she was demonic. Regardless, the connection was still there. I handed him the flat cap, still soaked in blood, and he placed it onto his head with a genuine smile. He looked himself again with it in place as he took a step onto the chair. Before climbing out, he turned to us and winked. He wriggled through the grate with some difficulty and reached his hands back through. I watched Ellie's tiny clawless hand clutch his fingerless one as he hoisted her through the gap. Left alone in the flat, I took another look at my surroundings and took a moment to consider all the pain beneath the block. I imagined a life where Ellie hadn't come with me, and I was trapped for good or dead at the hands of the rat creatures. As I burst through the small gap, pulled by both Derek and Ellie, the bright sun and sensation of the shrubs in my hair as I crawled through them felt like a rebirth. The garden was stunning. Dewdrops littered the green foliage, and the rising orange sun lit them up like fireflies. I had never been more appreciative of it. Looking back at the outer edge of the building, the grate was gone, along with any indication that it had been there at all. I wondered why it had appeared in my flat down there, why I had been the person to find it both times, and I remembered what Albert had said about the building altering those who stay. I pondered he was right, and if it was possible that it had altered me already. As we sat in the fresh morning air, I knew that none of it really mattered. Standing outside of a grim city tower block was cathartic. Gray concrete had never looked so inviting. We were home. The scenes of carnage and destruction that I had imagined would greet us when we entered the building were nowhere to be seen. Albert had certainly cleaned up. There was no kitten leg or creatures, or even evidence of a kerfuffle. It made me all the more nervous. I had no idea who had been hurt. The slow trudge to Ellie's floor was painful. My limbs all ached and the ringing in my ears continued. Still, I was just so glad to be getting her home. I couldn't wait to see Terry's face when we returned her daughter safely. Ellie may have looked a mess, but she was alive and well, which was the best I could ask for given the circumstances. I wish I could say that Terry greeted us with joy. I really do wish I could. Instead, her face was sullen, and the dark circles that sat like tattoos looked deeper than before. The skin around her eyes was puffed up and swollen with tears. When she spotted Ellie, she fell to her knees with relief. I hoped her face would brighten, but it didn't. "Where is he?" she sobbed, grabbing hold of Ellie and clutching her as tightly as she could. "Where's my son?" My heart dropped to my stomach. I'd made a sea of bad decisions in my time, but this, if this was what Albert had meant, was the worst consequence I could have imagined. I tried to find words, but I couldn't. I'd never seen a person look quite so broken. The pain in the screams of the mangled people wasn't a patch on Terry's sobbing. "Is that his blood?" she asked, gesturing to our clothes and hair while struggling to speak. I had been complacent. If the creatures had overpowered Eddie, if they had won, then maybe there wasn't enough of him left for Albert to see that he was like his sister. I shouldn't have written off the possibility like I had. Derek stepped forwards and put his hands on Terry's shoulders. She winced, and I remembered the lockdown situation, the only grounding in reality that I'd felt since returning to the upper layers of the block. She looked him in the eyes. "I don't know if you remember me, Terry. You were very small the last time we met, but I remember your parents." His kindly eyes had locked with hers as she melted and collapsed into him, wailing and gasping for air. Together we walked her to the sofa, not unlike how we had Essie not long before. I'd never known Terry's flat to be so quiet. Eddie was always playing, he was always so loud, and he always came home. Ellie was the absconder. It's why I'd found it easy to convince myself that Eddie was playing in his room, disrupting Terry's sleep like normal as we navigated the layers below. In all honesty, I think I was just trying to convince myself that I couldn't possibly be responsible for the death of a child. Logically, I always knew that with his sister gone for that long, he'd go looking. I really hoped we would get home in time, that he could hold his own. I don't know. Anything but this. I had buried my worries. Terry couldn't breathe properly through thick, heavy sobs. The noise muffled my already fucked up ears. Derek sat with his arms around her while Ellie nuzzled into his other side, and I sat opposite, blood-soaked, devastated, and alone. Knock, knock, knock. The tapping on the door brought all conversation, sobbing and brooding to a stop. Terry sprinted to the door, hope in her eyes, and as it opened, she wailed in joy. Get off me, Mum. Where's Ellie? The familiar voice of the young boy jolted me back into the room, and I turned to see Eddie, accompanied by none other than Mr. Prentice. Eddie spotted his sister on the sofa and ran towards the three of us. "Whoa, where did all the blood come from? Cool," he shouted. There were a few cuts and bruises covering his limbs, but he seemed mostly unharmed. His excitement was enough to tell me that he was okay. Derek stared at him in disbelief, not unlike how he had Ellie upon their first meeting. I turned and walked towards the door, to where Terry and Mr. Prentice were speaking. Mr. Prentice wobbled slightly as he kept himself propped up with his cane. "What happened?" I asked. "I'm not sure. I heard a lot of banging and decided I should go and check what was going on. I found him at the bottom by that ghastly lift. I didn't recognize the man in the suit. I couldn't get close enough, but I don't understand how anyone could stand over an injured child and not help. He ran into the lift when I got closer, and you know how I like to avoid that place. I'm not sure why folk run from me sometimes, but it was probably for the best. I'm not sure what I'd have done." I imagined Mr. Prentice in his animal form running towards Albert. Imagining that the landlord had run scared from the beast warmed my heart. "Anyway, I'm rather tired, so if you don't..." Mr. P stopped as he caught a glimpse of the inside of the flat behind us. His eyes widened. "Is that Derek?" Derek came up behind us and reached out a bloodied hand to shake Mr. Prentice's. The elderly man looked unsteady on his cane, as if he had seen a ghost. "It's been years," he stuttered, beaming, firmly gripping Derek's intact hand. "We shall have to have a drink together, my friend." "We will," Derek smiled. "I'm back now. There'll be plenty of time to catch up." Terry clutched the twins tightly as the two men reveled in their meeting. I couldn't help but smile quietly to myself and think of Essie. The kids were safe, Derek was back, and Albert couldn't continue to terrorize the block. And yet again, Mr. Prentice had proved himself the real MVP. We left Terry and the kids to have some family time. Ellie hugged Derek so tightly as we left, I thought she might crush him. We walked back to the 7th floor where mine and Mr. P's flats were. It should have been a victory walk, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything wasn't entirely over. My feeling was confirmed once the door to flat 48 closed behind Mr. Prentice, and Derek looked at me gravely. There's a few more things you need to know, Kat. Can you get cleaned up and meet me in the garden?" The previous tenant left a survival guide. This building will never be short of surprises. Home didn't feel as empty as it once had. Even without Jamie or Mr. Meow, I felt more hope than I had in months. I greeted Wrinkles and Tetley, fed them, and sat down to smoke at my fold-out table. Natural sun poured in through the windows, but my home would never look quite the same after my time in the Undertower. I turned on the shower and must have stood underneath the water, watching Albert's blood run down the sink for at least half an hour. Overwhelmed doesn't cover it. Shut down would be more accurate. I dithered while getting ready, exhausted and starting to feel the lack of sleep once again. My eyes were heavy. Sitting down on the bed was fatal. I woke up a few hours later, worried that I'd left Derek waiting. I rushed out of the flat and down the stairs to the garden. They were extra kind and only made me take one flight going straight from my floor to the main entrance. I couldn't have been more grateful. I was so exhausted. Outside on the bench, there he was. I don't know how or where he got clean, but the flat cap was as fresh as ever. I suppose after all the unbelievable things I'd learned, I shouldn't have even spared it a thought, but it was magic nonetheless. "I'm sorry, I fell asleep," I shouted before he had a chance to turn his head and notice me. "It's fine, Kat. I had a few things to do anyway." He spoke with a smile, the kind that you can hear just in a person's tone, and as I approached him in the garden, I realized why. I felt a lump form in my throat and tears well in my eyes as I noticed the tiny bundle in his lap. It was bald, wrinkly, and had exactly 3 legs. Mr. Meow. There was nothing I could do about his foot. I think the others ate that. But I thought this little guy deserved another shot at life. Derek grinned from ear to ear as I stared in disbelief at the tiny cat in front of me. Disregarding their burning properties entirely, I scooped him up and held him close, only putting him down as he singed my face a little. Thoughts started to whir in my mind, But before they could ever fully develop, Derek turned to me gravely and squashed them. I know what you're thinking, but there was nothing I could do for Jamie. After what Albert did. Don't apologize. I cut him off. What I did was selfish. Albert was right. Jamie died a long time ago. Sometimes I wonder if, even if I could have him back, maybe I'm a different person now to the one he knew. Derek didn't respond. He just watched while I played with Mr. Meow, tickling his belly as he rolled around purring on my lap. I know you must still have a lot of questions, and if I'm honest, I'm not sure any of them have answers that will satisfy. I'm no oracle. I still have questions myself, but I want to tell you what I know. I looked at him in confusion. Almost all loose ends had already been tied, and anything else seemed almost arbitrary. But Derek did everything with purpose, so I stayed quiet and I listened. Albert and I were never close. I told you downstairs that not trying harder was my biggest regret. I've come to realize that was a lie, and it's time I faced the true regret that haunts me. I tried to imagine what he could be talking about, but I couldn't. I nodded and listened instead. When we moved in, after our father died, we continued to lead very separate lives. I worked on the garden, and I embraced the strange things that happened around me. I don't know why I found it so easy to accept. I've seen hundreds come through this block, and almost all of them have been horrified at first, but I wasn't. When we first got here, there were only a handful of occurrences that showed themselves. The boy that lives in the mirror and the postman, along with others, came with the building. The longer we stayed, the more we discovered. I saw it as magic, a whole new world that most people never get to see. Albert didn't see it that way. He became paranoid, always looking over his shoulder thinking that things were out to get him. Derek took a moment to look at the grass, a sadness on his face, and I grabbed his fingerless hand to comfort him. What happened to him? I asked. He wasn't always the man you met. He was always a cold, ruthless bastard, but I would have never considered him evil. This place, the place that you and I call home, it started to drive him into darker and darker places. He didn't move his family in with him. He wanted to keep them separate from his business. And although I was intent on staying here, Albert never expected to be here longer than a few months. They would come and visit, and his wife Darla started to express concerns to me. She would come by my flat after visiting him, leaving their son with him to spend some time together while she claimed she was shopping in the city. She said he seemed frightened and angry. She was worried that he was losing his mind. Tears started to roll from his kindly eyes. Derek had always seemed so wholly good, such a wonderful person that it was hard to consider him mourning someone like Albert. But no one chooses the family they're born into. And I don't believe that anyone is entirely good or bad. Having feelings for an awful person couldn't take away from his spirit. What did you do? This is exactly it, Kat. I didn't do anything. I dismissed Darla entirely, and I was wrapped up in my own world of discovery. I wrote him off under the assumption he wouldn't have listened to me anyway. Albert got worse, Darla got more worried, and eventually he stopped answering the door. Mental health services were terrible in those days. There wasn't a great deal we could do. Albert controlled his money, and Darla couldn't get her hands on it to pay for care. If I hadn't ignored it, then maybe his son would be alive, I interrupted. I wish it were that simple. He answered and paused for a moment. We sat in silence, just holding hands for a few minutes until he spoke again. I need to show you. It's the only way you'll understand. He gestured to Mr. Meow. Let's take him home. We took the stairs, skipping a few floors as we went, before reaching the door to my flat, the real one, without the minus symbol in front. It was the first time that Derek had been inside since I had moved in, and it felt good to be in a room with him while not in a state of imminent crisis. The kittens were pleased to be reunited and were quickly cuddled in a heap on the sofa. Mr. Meow's return brought me more joy than I thought possible. I retrieved the chair that I'd used to prop up Jamie's prison and made tea before we sat together at the fold-out table. What do you need to show me? I asked. He didn't answer me directly and instead continued to talk about his family. His name was Jonathan, my nephew. I may not have been best of friends with my brother, but I loved that boy more than life itself. He enjoyed the garden and getting dirty. He wasn't like Albert or our father, he was a worker like me. I smiled. It was nice to imagine someone taking after Derek. He sounds wonderful. He was. He was only 19 years old when he died. No life at all, especially when you consider how many years me and his father have lived for. He had just started his own business, had a fiancée, and even in the worst of times, he didn't give up on his dad. It broke his heart when my brother stopped answering the door. So he got creative and resorted to desperate measures to try and reach Albert. I started to piece things together in my head, a pit forming in my stomach as I stopped him to ask the one question that was on my mind. What was his business? Derek looked at me, shame in his eyes. He knew that he would have to say it out loud and confirm what I already knew. He was a window cleaner. I didn't say a word. I wasn't sure how to respond. I racked my brain trying to comprehend what I was hearing. The knocking on the balcony doors from behind the curtain started. The familiar groaning and whining sound soon followed. Derek could sense my discomfort and broke the silence. When Jonathan climbed the tower to try and see his dad, he scared him. Albert wasn't in a good way. He was edgy and defensive. I don't know what happened for sure, but that knock from the outside must have really triggered something. He went outside and he stabbed him, multiple times with a kitchen knife, but you know that bit. It's what happened next that wasn't reported. My mouth hung open. Albert came to me. He told me exactly what he'd done. We fought. I could have killed him myself, but when I looked at him, I could see that he wasn't right. It was in his eyes, Kat. He wasn't my brother anymore. I tried to reason with him and get him to hand himself in, but he refused and got aggressive with me, saying that I just wanted to get my hands on the block. I left him in my flat to calm down so I could go to Jonathan. The window cleaner continued to scratch on the balcony door, his whines accompanying Derek's tale. He was out there on the balcony. He was dead. One look at him and I knew no ambulance could help him anymore. I sat with him for an eternity, trying to work out what to do. I should have called the police, but I couldn't bring myself to shop my own brother. There was no hope for Jonathan, but I thought I could help Albert. I was wrong. When I returned to my flat, he was gone. I begged the building to help me. I would have done anything to bring Jonathan back. But wishes work in mysterious ways here, and once the body was found, Albert was already missing, and my nephew had become the monster that lives on the balconies to this day. I stopped him. I tried to process what he was telling me. But he wasn't found for days. Why didn't you call the police? Why did you tell the residents not to let him in? I asked, confused. Love works in mysterious ways, Kat. I hope that you of all people can understand that. I was never fond of my brother, but I did love him, and without any way of saving his son, I wanted to give him a head start. And the residents? I asked again, remembering the strict rule that Prudence had left stating I shouldn't let him in under any circumstances. That's where things get complicated. I didn't realize at the time, but what he became was the building's way of giving him back to me. He is what he is because of me. When you see, you'll understand. He grabbed my hand and walked me to the balcony doors, letting go and pulling back the curtain to reveal the friendly-looking man I'd always seen outside my window, collapsed against it, scratching on the glass. Upon second inspection, I could see the family resemblance, but it wasn't one that I'd ever considered possible before. Prudence had told me about her experience with him, with Derek showing her what he truly looked like. I still hadn't expected quite what I saw when Derek rested his hand on my shoulder and told me to look. The window cleaner was gaunt, with bones protruding beneath his tight, thin, grayed flesh, raw skin, and wounds that were in varied stages of healing. He looked truly horrifying, but what alarmed me the most were his impossibly deep black voids for eyes. They were all too familiar. I turned to stare at Derek, unsure of quite what to say, as a million realizations crossed my mind. He started to speak again. I didn't want the residents to hurt him, Kat. When he gets inside, This form is revealed, and so many tried to hurt him at first. I found myself constantly telling people to ignore the friendly window cleaner in the hope that he would be safe from their fear of the unknown. I'd seen Albert's reaction to anything remotely different, and I couldn't bear Jonathan to face the same from the entire block. It was safer to leave him out here. After all, only someone who sees the good in everyone would let him in and accept him, and those people are 1 in a million. Derek half smiled, knowingly. Terry, I gulped, finally realizing who the twins' father was. I didn't know about them. Albert had me trapped below by the time Terry was in school, but the second I saw Ellie with you in that stairwell, I knew that she was family. When I realized that Jonathan's new form was a direct result of my actions, I started to come to terms with the power this place had given me. I embraced it, and I used it. I used it to hide Jonathan from his father, who I discovered had fled to the sealed floors not long after the murder. He never knew what became of his son. That shielding must have transferred when the twins were born. It was why he didn't know they existed. Once Albert had discovered his power, along with all his issues and the isolation he drove himself into, it just twisted him up into the man you knew him as. He made it his mission to know all of the special residents, but he never saw Jonathan again. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, emotion making it a little hard to speak. I wondered if Terry had continued a relationship with the window cleaner and why she had kept so quiet about the twins' dad. I processed the fact that Ellie had not only saved my life, but in doing so, she had killed her own grandfather. I couldn't judge Terry or Derek for their actions. He was right. Love works in mysterious ways. Just as it had when I made my choice regarding Jamie, and when I subsequently accepted that he was gone. I'm showing you because I think you'll understand, and because I don't want you to spend your life riddled with guilt for Jamie. We all make mistakes. Mine was a big one, but out of it came 2 of the purest creatures to walk this earth, and for that I'm grateful. He smiled again as he thought of Ellie and Eddie. Then he looked me dead in the eyes and spoke again. It's time I corrected my wrongdoings. Solemnly, he walked towards the doors and slid them open, coming face to face with the monstrous shell of a man holding a squeegee. The window cleaner took a step inside, struggling to move on his bone-thin legs, and stopped, millimeters from Derek's face. I couldn't help it. Despite what I knew, he scared me. The twins had balance. Even in their demonic form, there was a visible person there. Their father didn't resemble a person at all. The visceral reaction he ignited in me further proved Derek's point. People will generally attack what they fear. Had I been alone and let him in, I'd have almost certainly done the same. I watched with bated breath as Derek wrapped his arms around the bag of bones in a warm embrace. I watched as he let out a gentle sob and the window cleaner began to disintegrate into dust before my eyes. "No!" I shouted, hoping there was some other way, a happier solution, knowing full well that there wasn't. There was a heavy quiet in the room for a few moments. It was no life, Cat. I was cruel to let it continue as long as I did. Derek responded, turning to me. Although similar to the way that I had watched my love disappear on our bedroom floor, Derek's action wasn't filled with malice. It was done for the sake of mercy. Derek came towards me and hugged me. I felt emotionally and physically battered, fragile, and my ears continued to ring, but regardless, with him free and with me, I felt safe. Life in the block could finally begin, with no more dark secrets hanging over me. Amongst all the death and chaos, there was joy to be found. "It's over now. A new chapter," he whispered into my ear as I sobbed tears of relief into his shoulder, and the 3 cats played at our feet. Days passed and normality started to resume. I broke lockdown in order to give Terry some rest and spend some time with the twins. It was the least of all my sins throughout this time. It took a lot of explaining and apologizing, but she eventually came round and forgave me for endangering her kids. It sounds simple when put like that, and I'm sure parents reading this would deem me unforgivable. But their kids aren't Ellie and Eddie, and there aren't many folk out there as forgiving and loyal as Terry. I haven't broached the subject of their paternity to her. I'm not sure I ever will, but I hope that one day she'll feel comfortable enough to volunteer the information herself. I continue to pick items up for Mr. Prentice and take money to Carmilla at the Gnome. I'm looking forward to a drink there when this is all over, although I'm sure Mr. P will drink me under the table. The kittens are happy and growing every day. Truth be told, I think Mr. Meow looks badass with his missing leg, especially knowing the heroism it symbolizes. Things had started to look so positive that I almost forgot where I lived. I'd been in such a daze of relief that I hadn't noticed that the stairs had skipped floor 5 from the moment we returned from the undertower. I probably would have gone longer in blissful ignorance if I hadn't have found myself on that floor earlier today. The black sign was much the same as the one on the floors below that had sported a minus symbol before it. Thankfully, however, the artificial light that plagued those floors was nowhere to be seen, and sunlight poured in. I smiled when I first saw the sign, prepared myself to greet the man with a new name. But he wasn't there. His absence was a reminder that no matter how many tribulations I may have conquered, living here there would always be another just around the corner. Instead of the man without a name, in his place was the woman, Angela. My son's camera monitor alerted in the middle of the night. I checked it and saw my wife and son sitting on the bed. They weren't my wife and son. I'm a nurse, and I currently work nights. It's a total drag, but I'm hopeful I can go to days soon, since some co-workers are planning retirements. Anyway, I was working one night when just after 3 a.m., my son's monitor alerted me to sound and movement. No big deal at all, he probably coughed loudly or sneezed or something. He's 3 now, so he generally sleeps all night. I bring it up on my phone, and I see him and my wife sitting on the bed. Again, no big deal. He might have cried out or gotten scared or something. I was about to close the app when I noticed they were acting strange, almost creepy. And when I say almost creepy, I mean creepy as balls. They were sitting on the bed together, both of them just staring up at the camera with blank, emotionless stares. The night vision is black and white, so they had white, eerie-looking eyes. They didn't move at all aside from their visible breathing. They just sat there staring at the camera. I close the app and give my wife a call to make sure everything is okay. I never get to call home on lunch, so in a way this is kind of nice to get to talk to my family while at work. It rings a couple times before she answers with a very groggy, "Hello?" It was like she was dead asleep when I called, and she looked wide awake when on the camera. "Hey, you guys okay?" "Huh? Yeah. Buddy, my son's nickname, came in like 15 minutes ago. Seemed scared, so I said he could sleep with Mama. I'm confused here since I saw them in his room a minute ago." Literally 60 seconds had passed since I closed the app and made the call. "Wait, so you guys are in bed?" "Yeah, I fell back asleep right away. Everything okay? Everybody keeps waking me up." She's kind of annoyed. "Hang on a sec." I put her on speaker and bring up the app, hoping I don't see it. When the app loads, I get that pang of intense nervousness in my stomach that I haven't had in a long time, since I was a kid in school and realized while I was eating breakfast, a paper or something was due that day and I hadn't done it. My heart leaps into my throat. My wife and son are sitting on his bed looking up at the camera, same emotionless stares. "Hello? You guys are in bed, right?" "Yeah, we're trying to sleep." "Well, I'm looking at his camera and I see you two sitting on his bed." "Huh? Number, we're in our bed." "I know that's what you mean, but I'm looking at his bed and you two are in there." "Hang on," she says. She's quiet for a sec while she brings up the camera on her phone. I hear this guttural, terrified gasp, like she had sucked all the air in the room into her lungs, filling them to capacity. I don't hear this kind of gasp from my wife often, usually only when she's truly afraid, like during a jump scare in a movie, or one time when we turned her back on our son for literally a second, and he was down by the mailbox inches from the road. I hear rustling of sheets and the line goes dead. Of course, now I'm absolutely terrified myself, so I immediately call back. It goes to voicemail, so I call again. I call again and again with no answer. Finally, after about 4 minutes, she calls me. I tell you that 4 minutes felt like 40 years. "Hey, what's happening?" I ask. She's absolutely hysterical and crying. I can't understand a word she says. Stop. Slow down for just a second, I say. She slows down enough to explain they are in the car and driving to her parents'. She looked at the camera, and when she saw what was on it, she got up and grabbed our son and rushed downstairs and out the door. Didn't even close the garage. Don't worry about it, I said. I'll drive by when I get off and close it. We live in a generally safe neighborhood, so I'm not too concerned the door is up. You will not go in there, she says. Hell no, I return. Why are we on the camera? She asked. Is it a recording? I don't know, I return. I'm going to keep watching it and see if there's anything I can tell. Do our code words with Buddy. We have code words because we're nerds. We've seen too many pod people and imposter movies, so we decided a long time ago to make code words with each other to be able to tell if one of us was an imposter. We have a couple code words, but we also have a 3-sentence story we recite together, each saying a different part alternately of each other. I hear her on the phone saying the things we taught our son. He giggles as he says them. He does every time we practice, since he thinks they're a joke and doesn't have any idea of the real meaning. We're both convinced he's our son. My wife then says our part, and I'm convinced she's her. We made up these words as a complete joke to ourselves. I never once in my life ever imagined we'd actually need them. Unreal. She got to her parents safely and it was hard to hang up. I told her we'll figure it out in the morning, hopefully just a glitch. She said she didn't think it was a glitch. When she was running out, she had to run by our son's room and the door was open. There's a little flashing light on the back of the camera that indicates it's connected to the internet. It gives off just enough light that when she ran by, she thought she saw, out of the corner of her eye, a shadowy outline of what could have been an adult sitting on our son's bed. It sends chills down my spine to think about. Knowing they were safe and out of the house is the only thing that kept me at work that night. It was a long 4 hours, but I kept checking the camera every chance I got. Sure enough, they were still sitting on the bed staring up at the camera with emotionless gazes. I studied them to see if I could see any pattern, from their breathing to their blinking. Their breathing was steady and looked normal. It was their blinking that would tell me if this was just some kind of bizarre, time-looped freak accident video or not. I intently stare at my phone and count the seconds between each blink, telling myself if this is a loop, then their blinks should be even and occur at the same time each time. There was no pattern to their blinking. It was erratic and random, just as a person blinking should be. The passing hours are what finally sealed the deal that this was not a weird looped video of some kind. My son's window is visible on camera, and I can see on camera that it is getting lighter outside his room. His curtains keep out just enough light to prevent the camera from exiting night vision, but lets in just enough to be able to tell the sun is rising. I try to figure out what the hell I'm going to do before I leave work. Calling the police comes to mind, but I talk myself out of it. First of all, what am I supposed to say? Someone is in my house that looks like my wife but isn't. Worse yet, what if they are entities of some kind and the police do go over and it kills them or something? I decide to tell a coworker about it. He's a firm believer in the paranormal and might have a suggestion. I show him the video and tell him the story. His initial response of, "That's creepy as fuck," doesn't help much, but he says he wants to go over and check it out. He says we both should, to see if not my wife will try and act like my wife. I tell him absolutely not, and he says we should at least go to the house even if we don't go in. I agree on that since I wanted to close the garage. We got to my house and walked around the perimeter first. Not sure what we wanted to accomplish by that, but it felt like something we should do. The curtains were all drawn since nobody was there to open them in the morning, so we couldn't see anything. I went to close the garage and suddenly had this overwhelming urge to go inside and investigate. It was like I just had to know what was going on. So in we went. We walked through the kitchen towards the foyer where the stairs are. It's so quiet in our house right now you could hear a feather drop, forget the pin. We stop at the bottom of the stairs and wait a few seconds. I look at the camera again and they are still sitting there. I've never been so scared in my life. My coworker puts his foot on the first step and I suddenly say, "Stop," loudly. "Forget this. We're out of here," I tell him. "Come on." I start making my way back to the kitchen. We hear a loud creak in the floor from upstairs. It's my son's room. He has a very loud, creaky board right in the middle of his floor that's almost impossible not to step on. My wife and are still deciding if we ever want to fix it because it will alert us if he's ever up to no good when he gets older trying to sneak out or something. "Come on, come on, come on!" I yell as I motion for him to move his ass. We're out of the house in about 2 seconds. Out on the street, I check my phone. Now only Not My Son was sitting on the bed, same blank stare. Not My Wife was gone. Holy shit, my coworker says. That was stupid as fuck of us. Do not tell my wife we went inside. She would be so ungodly mad if she found out what we just did. I use my garage door opener in my car to close the door. Before we leave, I look at the camera again. Not My Wife is back on the bed with Not My Son, both staring blankly up at the camera, blinking every few seconds. That was all about 4 days ago now. Not My Wife and Not My Son are still sitting on the bed staring up at the camera. They haven't moved a millimeter. We obviously haven't gone back to our house. What do we do? I'm sorry it's taken so long. It's been an emotional month. I've felt like I'm losing my mind, or already lost it. I've been in the hospital for 3 weeks. You'll remember I left off at my wife's parents' house, not sure what the hell to do. My wife and I argued about it. My in-laws said, call the priest. I told my wife we're calling the cops, and that's it. The day we finally called the cops would be day 6. Not My family was still sitting on the goddamn bed, staring at the camera. I told the dispatcher there were intruders in my house, leaving out the part where they looked exactly like my family. I told her we were out of the house, but I would meet the police there. She dispatched 2 units. My wife begged me not to go. I told her I had to be there. I had a foolproof plan. I would take her mom's iPhone and FaceTime with my wife while showing the police the camera on my phone. They would see this as a fucked up situation and hopefully proceed with caution. My coworker friend said he would come with me as well. My friend and I beat the cops to my house. Like most of you mentioned in the comments previously, I was packing heat. I have a concealed carry, so I had my 1911.45 on me. I was not concerned this would bother the cops, as I was going to inform them of my permit and that I was currently carrying. What I wasn't going to tell them was that I had my father-in-law's AR-15 in my trunk. It's almost funny how many of you mentioned that was the way to go in my previous entry. I didn't plan on telling the cops about it because I was not planning on needing it. They would come armed and prepared. They showed up, and I let them know I was armed, and then enacted my plan. I initially told them the story. They looked at each other like I was crazy, and they didn't believe me. I FaceTimed my wife so they could see she was in fact not in the house despite what our camera was showing. They still didn't seem to believe me, but this did pique their interest. I hung up with my wife and told her I'd call her back as soon as we knew something. So now we're sure this isn't a recording, an officer stated, repeating what I said. It's not. The day-night cycle has changed every day. Their blinking is erratic and not cyclical like it was a repeat, I said. I know it's a stupid question, but your wife isn't a twin? The other officer asked. I told him no. My friend spoke up. I have an idea. Turn the volume up, I'll go throw a pebble at the window. He went around back while I turned up the volume to the max. Okay, I'm tossing. We heard the light tick sound from outside, but the 1-second delay on the camera came in loud and clear through my phone. Not My Wife moved at the sound of the pebble hitting the window. The first time I'd actually seen her move aside from the time she wasn't on screen, when I initially went inside our house the first day. She turned her head towards the window just slightly, before turning back to the camera. Okay, so this is live, an officer said. Okay, sir, I need you and your friend to stay outside here. We're going to go in and find out what's going on here. Should you ask for more units? I asked hopefully. Not at this time. We're going to assess the situation first. They don't appear to be armed, but we're going to be cautious. I opened the garage for them and they made their way in towards my kitchen door. They radioed dispatch that they were headed in and to stand by. They disappeared into my house. A few seconds after they went in, the camera went out. I wanted to vomit, and I felt like if I put my fingers in my mouth, I'd be able to feel my heart since it had leapt so far up into my throat. Shit, I yelled to my friend. I immediately popped the trunk and got my rifle out and ran into the garage, my friend right behind me. We got inside just in time to hear a low, guttural howl from upstairs, demonic sounding almost, along with raised voices from the police. There were several shots. "Need backup. Shots fired." He was cut off. "Oh my God!" my friend howled. He was scared shitless, but so was I. "God fucking damn it, I knew it," I said, running up the stairs. My son's room is the first one you come to after getting upstairs, so his wall is also what you see as you walk up the stairs. As I reached the top, I laid into the wall with my rifle. It has a 30-round magazine, but I felt like I fired 100 shots. I fired all over the place, knowing full well the ammo would go through the wall like it was paper, concentrating on where my son's bed would be, but also near the door and towards the floor as well in case whatever these things were thought to duck. We heard shrieks of pain coming from the room, then nothing. My friend and I paused for a minute before deciding to go in because the camera was still out. We heard a whimpering coming from the room. There was a dead cop in the hallway we had to step over. It was awful, and I'll never be able to unsee it. His head was several feet away from his body in the threshold to our guest room. We found the other cop in my son's room right inside the doorway. He had several large holes in his torso, as if he'd been impaled. Exactly what I was afraid would happen had happened. I called the cops, and whatever these things were killed them. When we entered the room, we found the source of the whimpering was not my wife. She was laying on her back on the floor, holding her torso that was bullet-ridden and breathing heavy. The scene was awful. I can hardly put into words how awful it was. I know now, just like I did then, they weren't my family. It shouldn't have been hard. I should have been able to just go in and finish it. But instead I fell to my knees. Not my wife begged for her life. "I don't want to die, honey," she whimpered. "I wanted to have more kids. I can't die now." I looked over at not my son, who had to be dead. He'd taken 2 shots at least to the head, or what was left of it. He had several more in his torso and 1 or 2 on his legs and arms. If you have kids, seeing their lifeless, bullet-ridden body is a special kind of hell. Again, I knew it wasn't my son, but it was. I was going to be sick. I'd killed my family. I turned back to not my wife. She was acting just like my wife. It even mimicked her anxiety about death that she has had in the past year or so. "It's not her, man." I forgot my friend was even there. "It's not her. Shoot it." I know what you guys are thinking. How many times has this happened in the movies, and you scream at your TV for the main character to just shoot the imposter because it's not their loved one? I guess movies get it right somehow. I'll never roll my eyes at the character who can't kill an imposter again. "Please don't shoot me," it begged. My hands were shaking as I aimed at it. Why couldn't I do it? I knew, this wasn't my wife. "Listen, man," my friend began calmly. "Look at it. Its blood is yellow. It's not your family." Was it yellow? It was. Seeing my family slain was so traumatic I hadn't even noticed their blood wasn't red. I steadied my aim, and not my wife suddenly stopped begging. She began that guttural, terrifying shriek, and something black or gray started to protrude from her mouth, like a tentacle or something, and I fired. At that range, her head more or less exploded. Whatever these things were, they appeared to be mortal. I was still on my knees, and my friend was out in the hallway just outside the door. We heard the sounds of approaching police sirens. I'd forgotten one of the cops had gotten a shots fired call over the radio before being killed. It seemed like it had been hours, but it had only been about 5 minutes since the police had gone in. My friend went downstairs to let the police know what to expect. I stood up and slowly made my way into the hallway. I was lightheaded and felt like I was going to be sick. My bedroom is adjacent to my son's, so the doorway is about a foot to the right of my son's doorway. My door was closed, but as I exited my son's room, my door opened. Not me walked out into the hallway, wearing exactly the same thing I was at that time. I was shocked in place. I couldn't move, but it did. It walked towards me, and its right arm turned black and morphed into what appeared to be a tentacle. It was wiggling around like a squid or octopus appendage. When he thrust his arm at me, it solidified and impaled me through my abdomen. It then stabbed me in the left leg just above the kneecap. I fell to the ground in pain. Its tentacle arm was wiggling again. "Why did you kill my family?" it asked. When it spoke, its voice changed pitch several times. It was my voice, then much deeper, then normal again. It alternated several times, saying that one sentence. It moved in closer. The rifle was gone, but I still had my .45. I pulled it out and got a shot off in its right knee. It howled. As Not-Me fell to his knee, I fired a couple more shots, getting 2 into its abdomen and left side of its ribs. It breathed heavily for a few seconds before I used the last of my strength to aim proper and shot Not-Me in the face. Its blood was also yellow. I lay there bleeding out, thinking this was it for sure. I still had some strength from adrenaline kicking in, so I took my belt off and tried to make a tourniquet for my leg. With my stomach wound, it was hard to give it a good yank to tighten it. I then took my shirt off and balled it up and packed my stomach wound and applied as much pressure as I could. Being a nurse probably saved my life. I passed out, but the measures I took must have kept me alive long enough for EMS to arrive. I heard raised voices and the sound of pounding coming up the stairs before I went out. It was probably a cop, but I felt pressure from somebody trying to keep my wound packed before I went out. I was in and out of consciousness as EMS arrived, along with probably every cop in the city. I was wheeled downstairs and put in an ambulance, but while I was being loaded onto the gurney upstairs, I heard cops freaking out, and rightfully so. They'd lost 2 brothers and there were 3 other bodies. Did he kill his brother? Are they twins? Probably referring to Not-Me's dead body. Or his whole family? Put him on armed guard while at the hospital. He'll probably be getting charged. As I was getting placed into the ambulance, I saw my friend talking to a group of about 10 cops, all listening very intently to what he was saying. I went out again in the ambulance. I woke up in the ER. My wounds had been treated. The tentacle hadn't been more than a few inches wide, so it was just slightly larger than a large knife. They'd sewn me up, and I found that I was currently receiving a blood transfusion due to blood loss at my home. My wife had authorized them to do whatever they had needed while I was unconscious. She was also extremely pissed that I went in the house. We're okay now, but that's a story for another day. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks since I ended up getting an infection and almost went septic. I needed quite a few antibiotics. For the entire 3 weeks, I had cops in my room with questions. After about a week, they released me and no longer had me under armed guard. I told them absolutely everything, not caring if it made sense or not. And thank God my friend had come with me, since he was able to corroborate this weird story. Midway through my hospital stay, men with suits came to pay me a visit. They were government, I knew right away. They said they were FBI, but I don't know if I believe that. They wanted to talk about not my family. The police chief and the coroner were involved, and it was very hush-hush. They made it clear this was not to get out to the public. This is where I have to apologize, probably, for an anticlimactic ending to this ordeal. I don't know what Not Me and my family were, neither do they. The only thing we know is that they were sentient creatures that looked like us and had yellow blood. I begged the coroner to tell me about their autopsies, but he said he wasn't allowed to say. He must have felt bad for me, since I received a bouquet of flowers a couple days later. The card inside the envelope read, "We don't know what they are. They have the same organs we do, but in different parts of their body aside from their brain. But what's red and pink inside us is green and yellow inside them. They're humanoid creatures, but whatever they aren't human. The government thinks they may be extraterrestrial. Destroy this letter ASAP." We had our house professionally cleaned. It was almost surely a government team, since they contacted us on behalf of the police. We could not find any Google reviews or website for the company online. My wife and I are not going to go back to our house. We would love to burn it down, but there's no way to do that and avoid suspicion of arson at this point. We'll end up taking a huge loss on the property, since everyone in our neighborhood knows there was an incident involving multiple deaths in the house, but don't know what actually happened. It'll be hard to sell, but eventually it will. We're going to move on from here. I told everyone at work it was a home invasion and they bought it. I'll go back to work in a couple weeks and we'll start looking for a new house. Again, I'm sorry. I know everyone wanted a concrete ending and to know exactly what the fuck those things were, but we just don't know. Alien sounds good to me. I've been thinking if they were supernatural or actual demons, gunfire wouldn't have been able to kill them. It's just hard to say. If they were aliens, why did they just sit there and creep in our house for a week? They didn't even try to take over our lives. It's hard to wrap my head around. If it is aliens, keep your eyes peeled out there. There could be more of them. As far as missing persons go, I'd say about half the calls I get are related to that. The others are rescue calls, people who fall down cliffs and hurt themselves, get injured by fire. You wouldn't believe how often this happens, mostly drunk kids. Get bitten or stung by animals or insects. We're a tight team, and we have veterans who are excellent at finding signs of lost people. That's what makes these cases where we never find any trace of them so frustrating. One in particular was upsetting for all of us, because we did find a trace of them, but it just led to more questions than answers. An older man had been hiking alone on a well-established trail, but his wife called to say that he hadn't come home when he should have. Apparently he had a history of seizures, and she was worried that he hadn't taken his medication and had suffered one out on the trail. Before you ask, I have no idea why he thought it was okay to go out alone, or why she didn't go with him. I don't ask about that kind of thing because past a certain point it really doesn't matter. Someone is missing, and it's my job to find them. We went out in a standard search formation, and it wasn't long before one of our vets found signs that the guy had gone off the trail. We grouped up and followed him, spreading out in a fan to make sure we were covering as much ground as possible. Suddenly, a call comes over the radio telling us to all head back to the vet's location, and we come right away, because this usually means the missing person is injured, and we need a full team to help get them out safely. We meet back up, and the vet is just standing at the base of a tree with his hands on the sides of his head. I ask my buddy what's going on, and he points up into the branches of this tree. I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing, but there's a walking stick dangling from a branch at least 30 feet off the ground. The little strap thing on the handle has been looped around the branch, and it's just hanging there. There's no way the guy could have tossed it up that far, and we don't see any other signs that he's still in the area. We call up into the tree, but it's obvious no one's in it. We're all just sort of left scratching our heads. We keep searching for the guy, but we never find him. We even bring our canines out, but they lose his scent long before this tree. Eventually, the search is called off because there are other calls we have to attend to, and past a certain point, there's not much we can do. The guy's wife called us every day for months, asking if we'd found her husband, and it was heartbreaking to hear her get more and more hopeless each time. I'm not sure why this call in particular was so upsetting, but I think it was just the sheer improbability of it. That and the questions that were raised. How the hell had this guy's cane ended up there? Did someone kill him and toss that up there as some weird trophy? We did our best to find him, but it was almost like a taunt. We still talk about that one from time to time. One of my first jobs as a trainee was a search op for a 4-year-old kid that had gotten separated from his mom. This was one of those cases where we knew we were going to find him because the dogs were on a strong scent trail, and we saw clear signs that he was in the area. We ended up finding him in a berry patch about half a mile from where he'd been last seen. Kid wasn't even aware that he'd wandered that far. One of the vets brought him back, which I was glad for because I'm really not good with kids, and I find it hard to talk to them and keep them company. As my trainer and I are headed back, she decides to take me on a detour to show me one of the hot spots where we tend to find missing people. It's a natural dip in the land near a popular trail, and people will usually move downhill because it's easier. We hike out there, it's a few miles away, and we get there in about an hour or so. As we're walking around the area and she's pointing out places she's found people in the past, I see something in the distance. Now this area we're in is about 8 miles from the main parking area, though there's back roads you can take to get closer if you don't want to hike that far. But we're on state-protected land, which means there can't be any kind of commercial or residential development out here. The most you'll ever see is a fire tower or makeshift shelter that homeless people think they can get away with building. But I can see from here that whatever this thing is has straight edges, and if there's one thing you learn quickly, it's that nature rarely makes straight lines. I point it out, but she doesn't say anything. She just hangs back and lets me wander over and check it out. I get within about 20 feet of it, and all the hair on the back of my neck stands up. It's a staircase, in the middle of the fucking woods. In the proper context, it would literally be the most benign thing ever. It's just a normal staircase with beige carpet, and about 10 steps tall. But instead of being in a house where it obviously should be, it's out here in the middle of the woods. The sides aren't carpeted, obviously, and I can see the wood it's made of. It's almost like a video game glitch, where the house has failed to load completely and the stairs are the only thing visible. I stand there, and it's like my brain is working overtime to try and make sense of what I'm seeing. My trainer comes and stands next to me, and she just stands there casually, looking at it as if it's the least interesting thing in the world. I ask her what the fuck this thing is doing here, and she just chuckles. "Get used to it, rookie. You're gonna see a lot of them." I start to move closer, but she grabs my arm, hard. "I wouldn't do that," she says. Her voice is casual, but her grip is tight, and I just stand there looking at her. "You're gonna see them all the time, but don't go near them, don't touch them, don't go up them. Just ignore them." I start to ask her about it, but something in the way she's looking at me tells me that it's best if I don't. We end up moving on, and the subject doesn't come up again for the rest of my training. She was right, though. I'd say about every 5th call I go on, I end up running across a set of stairs. Sometimes they're relatively close to the path, maybe within 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes they're 20, 30 miles out, literally in the middle of nowhere, and I only find them during the broadest searches or training weekends. They're usually in good condition, but sometimes it looks like they've been out there for miles. All different kinds, all different sizes. The biggest I ever saw looked like they came out of a turn-of-the-century mansion and were at least 10 feet wide, with steps leading up at least 15 or 20 feet. I've tried talking about it with people, but they just give me the same response my trainer did. "It's normal. Don't worry about it. They're not a big deal, but don't go close to them or up them." When trainees ask me about it now, I give them the same response. I don't really know what else to tell them. I'm really hoping someday I get a better answer, but it hasn't happened yet. This is another one that was less spooky and more sad. A young man went missing late in winter, when realistically no one should be going that far out onto the trails. We close a lot of them, but some remain open year-round, unless there's a shitload of snow. We did an op for him, but we had about 6 feet of snow on the ground. It was an unusually heavy snow year, and we knew it wasn't likely that we'd find him until spring when the thaw came. Sure enough, when the first big thaw came, a hiker reported a body a little ways off the main trail. We found him at the base of a tree in a pile of melted snow. I knew right away what had happened, and it scared the living shit out of me. Most of you who ski or snowboard or spend any amount of time on a mountain will probably have guessed too. When snow falls, it doesn't collect as thick in the areas beneath the branches. It happens most with fir trees because they have a sort of closed umbrella shape. So what you end up with is a space around the base of a tree that's filled with a mixture of loose, powdery snow, air, and branches. They're called tree wells, and they're not immediately obvious if you don't know what you're looking for. We put up signs in the welcome center, big ones, letting people know how dangerous they are, but every year that we get an unusual amount of snow, at least one person doesn't read them or doesn't take the warning seriously, and we find out about it in spring. My best guess is that this young man was hiking and got tired, or maybe a cramp from walking in the deep snow. He went to go sit at the base of the tree, not knowing that there was a tree well, and fell in. He got stuck with his feet up, and the surrounding snow caved in around him. Unable to free himself, he suffocated. It's called snow immersion suffocation, and it doesn't usually happen except in really deep snow. But if you get stuck in a weird position like this guy did, even 6 feet of snow can be lethal. What scared me the most was imagining how he must have struggled. Upside down, in the freezing cold, he didn't die quickly. The snow would have formed a dense, heavy pile on top of him, and it would have been literally impossible to get out. As it got harder to breathe, he would have known what was happening. I can't even imagine what he was thinking in his last moments. A lot of my less outdoorsy friends want to know if I've ever seen the goat man while I've been out on calls. Unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, I've never had anything quite like that happen. I guess the closest was the whole black-eyed man thing, but I didn't see anything. However, there was one call where I had something kind of similar happen, but I'm not sure I'm willing to chalk it up to the goat man. We'd gotten a report that an older woman had fainted along one of the trails and needed assistance getting back down to the main area. We hike up to where she's at, and her husband is just beside himself. He runs, well, I guess more jogs to us, and tells us that he was a little ways off the trail looking at something when his wife starts screaming behind him. He runs back to her and she's passed out on the trail. We get her on a backboard, and as we're getting her down to the welcome center, she comes to and starts screaming again. I calm her down and ask her what happened. I can't remember verbatim what she said, but essentially, what happened was this. She'd been waiting for her husband when she started hearing this really strange sound. She said it sounded sort of like a cat, but it was off somehow, and she couldn't quite figure out why. She went a little ahead to try and hear it better, and it sounded like it was coming closer. She said the closer it got, the more uneasy she was, until she finally figured out what was wrong. I do remember this next part, because it was so weird that I don't think I could forget it if I tried. It wasn't a cat. It was a man saying the word meow over and over. Just meow, meow, meow. But it wasn't a man. It couldn't have been, because I've never heard a man make his voice buzz like that. I thought my hearing aid was going out, but it wasn't. I adjusted it, and it still sounded all buzzy. It was awful. He was coming closer, but I couldn't see him. And the closer he got, the more scared I was. And the last thing I remember was a shape coming out of the trees. I guess that's when I fainted. Now, obviously, I'm a little perplexed as to why a guy would be out in the fucking woods chanting meow meow at people. So once we get down the mountain, I tell my superior that I'm going to go search the area to see if I can find anything. He gives me the go-ahead, and I grab a radio and hike back to where she fainted. I don't see anyone, so I keep going about a mile more, and when I head back, I go off the trail to see if I can figure out where she saw him coming from. It's almost sunset by this point, and I don't have any desire to be out at night alone, so I just sort of write it off and make a mental note to check it out again tomorrow. But as I'm headed back, I start to hear something in the distance. I stop, and I call out for anyone in the immediate area to identify themselves. The sound didn't come closer or get louder, but it sounded exactly like a man saying, meow meow in this really odd monotone. As comical as it makes it sound, it was almost like that guy on South Park with the electrolarynx Ned. I go off the trail in the direction I think it's coming from, but I never seem to get closer. It's almost like it's coming from all directions. Eventually, it just sort of fades out, and I ended up going back to the welcome center. I didn't get any further reports like that, and even though I went back to that area, I never heard that exact sound again. I suppose it could have been some stupid kid out there fucking with people, but even I have to admit it was weird. The first happened on a case that I went out on right after I got out of training and was still pretty new to everything. Before I took this job, I was a volunteer, so I had a basic idea of what to expect. But on those calls, you're mostly dealing with finding lost people after vets have found signs of them. As an CR officer, you go out for all kinds of cases, from animal bites to heart attacks. This case got called in early in the morning, from a young couple who were up on one of the trails that goes by the lake. The husband was completely hysterical, and we couldn't really figure out what was going on. We could hear the woman screaming in the background, and he was begging us to come up there right away. When we get there, we see him holding his wife, and she's got something in her arms. She's screaming these awful, almost animal-like screams, and he's sobbing. He sees us and he screams at us to help them, to please get an ambulance up there. Now obviously we can't just drive an ambulance up the walking path, so we ask him if his wife needs help, or if she can walk on her own. He's still hysterical, but he manages to tell us that it's not his wife that needs help. I go over while one of the vets tries to calm him down, and I ask the wife what's going on. She's rocking, holding something, and just shrieking over and over. I crouch down and see that whatever she's holding, it's covering her with blood. That's when I notice the sling on her front, and my heart sinks. I ask her to tell me what's going on, and I sort of pry her arms gently open so I can see what she's holding. It's her baby, obviously dead. His head is caved in on one side and he's covered in scratches. Now, I've seen dead bodies before, but something about this whole situation hits me hard. I have to take a second to compose myself, and I get up and go get one of the other vets who's standing by. I tell him that it's a dead kid, and he sort of pats my shoulder and tells me he'll deal with it. It took us over an hour to get this woman to let us see her kid. Every time we try to take him from her, she flips out and tells us we can't have him, that he'll be okay if we just leave her alone and let her help him. But eventually, one of the vets manages to calm her down, and she gives us the body. We took it back to the med area, but when the EMTs showed up, they told us that there was never any hope of saving the kid. He died instantly from the trauma to his head. I was good buddies with one of the nurses who met them at the hospital, and she told me later what had happened. Turns out the couple had been walking with the baby in the sling, and they stopped because the kid was fussing. The dad takes the kid and is holding him, looking out over this little gully by the path. The mom comes to stand next to him, but she ends up stepping on a loose patch of soil and she trips. She falls into the dad, who drops the kid, who ends up falling about 20 feet down this little gully onto the rocks at the bottom. The dad climbed down and recovered the kid, but he'd fallen right on his head and was dead by the time he got there. The baby was only about 15 months old. It was a total freak accident, a series of events that coalesced into the worst possible outcome. Probably one of the more awful calls I've been on. I haven't seen a lot of animal bites in my time as an SAR officer, mostly because there aren't that many animals that come around the area. While there are bears in the area, they tend to stay pretty far away from people, and sightings are highly unusual. Most of the animals you'll see are small ones, like coyotes, raccoons, or skunks. What we do see frequently, though, are moose. And let me tell you, moose are nasty fuckers. They'll chase after anything for any reason, and God help you if you get in between a female and its baby. One of the more amusing calls was of a guy who'd gotten chased down by an absolutely massive male moose and was stuck up a tree. Took us almost an hour to get him down, and when he was finally on solid ground again, he looks at me and says, "God damn, them fuckers is big up close." I guess that's not really a scary story, but we still laugh about that one. Running. It's the only time I've ever lost my composure like that, but something about it was so incredibly wrong, and neither of us wanted to stay out there anymore. When we got back to the rendezvous, we asked if anyone else had heard anything strange, but no one else knew what we were talking about. I know it sounds sort of anticlimactic, but that call fucked me up for a long time. As for the little girl, we never found a trace of her. We keep an eye out for her and all the other people who we've never found. But frankly, I doubt we'll ever find anything. Of the missing persons calls I've gone out on, only a handful have ever resulted in a complete disappearance, meaning no trace of the person and no body ever found. But sometimes, finding a body just leads to more questions than answers. Here are some of the bodies we've found that have become infamous in our team. A teenage boy whose remains were recovered almost a year after he vanished. We found the top of his skull, 2 finger bones, and his camera almost 40 miles from where he was last seen. The camera, sadly, was destroyed. The pelvis of an older man who had vanished a month earlier. That was all we found. The lower jaw and right foot of a 2-year-old boy on the highest peak of a ridge in the southern part of the park. The body of a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome, almost 20 miles from where she'd vanished. She had died of exposure 3 weeks after going missing, and all of her clothes were intact except for her shoes and jacket. There were berries and cooked meat in her stomach when they did the autopsy. The coroner said it appeared as if someone had been taking care of her. There were no suspects ever identified. The frozen body of a 1-year-old baby, found a week after vanishing in the hollow trunk of a tree 10 miles from the area he was seen last. There was fresh milk found in his stomach, but his tongue was gone. A single vertebra and right kneecap of a 3-year-old girl, found in the snow almost 20 miles from the campground her family had been at the previous summer. Now on to a couple of the stories my friend told me. I mentioned that you were all interested in the stairs and you're in luck. He's had a closer encounter with them. Though he doesn't have any explanation for them, he does have a bit more experience with them than I do. My buddy has been an SAR officer for about 7 years. He started when he was a junior in college, and he had a very similar experience when he first encountered the stairs. His trainer told him almost the same thing mine did, which was to never go near, touch, or ascend them. For the first year, he did just that, but apparently his curiosity got the better of him, and on one call, he broke away from the line and went to go check a set of them out. He said they were about 10 miles from the path where a teenage girl had vanished, and the dogs were following a scent. He was on his own, lagging behind the main group, when he saw a set of stairs off to his left. They looked like they were from a new house because the carpeting was pristine and white. He said that as he got closer, he didn't feel any different or hear any weird noises. He was expecting something to happen, like bleeding from his ears or collapsing, but he got right up next to them and didn't feel anything. The only thing, he said, that was odd was that there was absolutely no debris on the steps, no dirt, leaves, dust, anything, and there didn't appear to be any signs of animal or insect activity in the immediate area, which he found strange. It was less like things were avoiding them, and more like they just happened to be in a relatively barren part of the forest. He touched the stairs and didn't feel anything except that sort of sticky feeling you get from new carpet. Making sure his radio was on, he slowly climbed the stairs. He said it was terrifying, because the way they'd been stigmatized, he wasn't really sure what was going to happen to him. He joked that half of him expected to be teleported to some other dimension, and the other half was watching for a UFO to come swooping down. But he got to the top with little event, and he stood there looking around. But, he said, the longer he stood on the top step, the more he felt like he was doing something very, very wrong. He described it as the feeling you'd get if you were in a part of a government building you have no business being in, as if someone was going to come and arrest you or shoot you in the back of the head at any second. He tried to brush it off, but the feeling got stronger and stronger, and that's when he realized that he couldn't hear anything anymore. The sounds of the forest were gone, and he couldn't hear his own breathing. It was like some kind of weird, awful tinnitus, but more oppressive. He climbed back down and rejoined the search and didn't mention what he'd done. But, he said, the weirdest part came after. His trainer was waiting back at the welcome center after the search ended for the day, and he cornered my buddy before he could leave. He said his trainer had this look of intense anger, and he asked what was wrong. "You went up them, didn't you?" My buddy said it wasn't phrased as a question. He asked how his trainer knew. The trainer just shook his head. "Because we didn't find her. The dogs lost her scent." My buddy asked what that had to do with anything. The trainer asked how long he'd been on the stairs, and my buddy said no more than a minute. The trainer gave him this really awful, almost dead-eyed look, and told him that if he ever went up another set of stairs again, he'd be fired. Immediately. The trainer walked away, and I guess he's never answered any of the questions my buddy has asked him about it since. My buddy has been involved in a lot of missing persons cases where there's never been a trace of them found. I mentioned David Paulides, and my buddy said he can confirm that those stories are, for the most part, accurate. He said that most of the time, if the person isn't found right away, they're either never found, or they're found weeks, months, or years later, in places they can't possibly have gotten to. One story he told me really stood out that involved a 5-year-old boy with a severe mental disability. The little boy vanished from a picnic area in the late fall. In addition to the mental disability, he was also physically handicapped, and his parents explained over and over that he simply could not have vanished. It was impossible. Someone had to have taken him. My buddy said they searched for this kid for weeks, going miles out of the accepted range, but it was like he'd never been there. The dogs couldn't pick up his scent anywhere, not even in the picnic area where he'd apparently vanished from. Suspicion fell on the parents, but it was pretty clear that they were devastated and hadn't done anything sinister to their kid. The search was concluded about a month later, and my buddy said everyone had pretty much forgotten it by later in the winter. He was out on a training op in the snow, on one of the higher peaks, when he came across something in the snow. He said he saw it from far away at first, and when he got closer, he realized it was a shirt, frozen and sticking part way out of the powder. He recognized it as belonging to the kid, because it had a distinctive pattern. About 20 yards away, he found the kid's body, laying partially buried in the snow. My buddy said there was no way the kid had been dead for any more than a few days, even though he'd been missing for almost 3 months. The kid was curled around something, and when my buddy brushed off the snow to see what it was, he said he almost couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a big chunk of ice that had been carved crudely to look sort of like a person. The kid was holding it so tight that it had frostbitten his chest and hands, which my buddy could tell even with the decay that had taken place. He radioed the rest of the crew, and they took the body off the mountain. Now, he recapped all of this for me, and to put it simply, there was no way this kid could have both survived for almost 3 months on his own or have gotten to this peak. There was no physical way this child could have walked almost 50 miles and ended up on the top of a goddamn mountain. To top it off, there was nothing in the kid's stomach or colon. Nothing. Not even water. It was like my buddy said, the kid had been taken off the face of the earth, put in suspended animation, and dropped on this mountain months later, only to die of exposure. He's never really gotten over that one. The last story I'll share from him was one that took place relatively recently, only a few months ago. They were out doing a recon for mountain lions because there had been several reports of sightings in the last couple of days. One of our jobs is to scout out the areas where these animals are seen to ensure that if they are in the area, we can warn people and close off those trails. He was out on his own in a very heavily forested part of the park toward dusk when he heard what sounded like a woman screaming in the distance. Now, as most of you know, when a mountain lion screams, it sounds almost exactly like a woman being brutally murdered. It's unsettling, but far from abnormal. My buddy radioed back and let ops know that he'd heard one, and that he was going to keep going to see if he could figure out where its territory started. He heard the mountain lion scream a couple more times, always from the same spot, and determined the approximate area of the mountain lion's territory. He was about to head back when he heard another scream, this time within only a few yards of him. Of course, he freaks out and starts heading back at a much faster pace, because the last thing he wants is to run into a goddamn mountain lion and get mauled to death. As he got back on the path and started heading back, the screaming followed him, and he broke into a jog. When he was about a mile from ops, the screaming stopped, and he turned around to see if it was following him. It was almost night by this point, but he said in the distance, just before the path rounded a corner, he could see what looked like a male figure. He called out to them, warning them that the paths were closed and that he needed to come back to the welcome center. The figure just stood there, and my buddy started to walk over. When he was about 10 yards away, the figure took, as he described, an impossibly long step toward him and let out the same scream my buddy had been hearing. My buddy didn't even say anything. He just turned and sprinted back to ops, never looking behind him. By the time he got back, the screaming had moved back into the woods. He didn't mention it to anyone else, just said that there was a mountain lion in the area and that they would need to close those paths until the animal could be located and moved. The first, she told me in response to my asking about her most traumatic calls. She shook her head and told me that really bad calls happen more frequently on the mountain, since the potential for nasty accidents is higher. About 5 years ago, one of the parks she worked at had a string of disappearances. It was a bad year, she said, one of the worst on record as far as weather went. They were getting about a foot of new snow every couple of days, and there were a few avalanches that killed some climbers. They'd warned people about staying on the mapped areas, but of course there's always those who don't listen. In one particularly nasty case, an entire family got wiped out because the father decided he knew better than the officials, and he took them out into an area that wasn't safe. They were snowshoeing, and as best KD could figure, they'd walked onto a shelf of snow that looked solid, but actually wasn't. It gave way, and this family went ass over tea kettle almost 300 feet down a slope. They landed on the rocks at the bottom, and the parents died instantly. One of the kids did as well, but the other two survived. One had a broken leg and fractured ribs, the other was almost unharmed save for some bruising and a sprained ankle. The uninjured child left his sibling behind and set out to find help. KD said the kid didn't make it more than half a mile before a storm overtook him. Kid stopped to try and get warm, or maybe just to rest, and ended up freezing to death. They ended up finding the family with the help of some witnesses who saw them heading out into the wilderness, and she was the one to find the kid who'd frozen to death looking for help. She said it had started to snow, just enough to obscure long-distance vision, but not enough to make searching impossible. She saw a figure sitting in the snow up ahead, and she got to it as quickly as possible. She described in detail how, as she got closer, she realized first that it was a child, second that they were deceased, and third that they had frozen in one of the most pitiful positions she's ever found a corpse in. The kid was sitting upright, with his knees tucked up against his chest. His arms were curled around them, and his head was tucked up in his coat. When she moved the coat to look at his face, she saw that he'd died crying. His face was twisted, and the tears were frozen on his cheeks. She said it was painfully obvious that the kid was terrified when he succumbed to hypothermia, and as a mother, it broke her heart. She told me, repeatedly, that she hopes the father is burning in hell as we speak. The other traumatic story she told me that stood out in my mind was one that happened when she was a rookie. Her team got a report of an experienced climber who hadn't come home the previous day. His wife was convinced that something bad had happened because he'd never failed to come home on time. They went out looking for him and had to climb what sounded like some very technically challenging parts of the mountain. They got to a relatively flat area, and KD started seeing blood in the snow. She followed the trail, and as she went, she started seeing little bits of tissue. She wasn't sure exactly what body part it had come from, but the farther she followed it, the more there was. She follows this blood and tissue trail to a sheltered area under a cliff face, and she finds the climber. She said there was so much blood, more than she'd ever seen before. He was lying face down, one arm stretched in front of him, as if he'd died crawling. She looks closer and sees that he's been partially disemboweled, which is where the tissue she'd seen had come from. The guy has an ice pick tucked into a hip holster, and it's covered in blood. Of course, they'll never be sure exactly what happened, but she said, as best she can figure, this is what went down. The guy had been attempting to climb up to the next area and had been using his ice axe to ascend. He'd probably hit a loose patch and had fallen. On the way down, or possibly when he landed, he'd gotten impaled by the axe, and it had disemboweled him. He drug himself along, tearing pieces of himself out as he went, and had died under the cliff face. She isn't terribly bothered by gore, but I guess a few of the guys who came to help her remove the body threw up when they turned him over, and a good portion of his intestines spilled out. I mentioned to her that I was interested in hearing about any experiences she had with people completely disappearing. Her eyes light up, and she leans in close to me. "Want to hear a real doozy?" she asks. She tells me about how, when she first started, there was a case that got a lot of attention in the media. A family had been out berry picking in an area of the forest very close to the entrance of the park. They had 2 little boys, both under the age of 5, and at some point during the day, one of them vanishes. There's an absolutely massive search, and they find absolutely nothing. It's another of those cases where it's like, the kid was never there in the first place. The dogs just sit down and don't pick up on anything. No trace of the kid is found. The search goes on for about 2 months, but is eventually called off. Fast forward to 6 months later. The family comes back to place flowers at a memorial that's been set up there for the kid. They bring their other son. While they're placing the flowers, they lose sight of the kid for about 3 seconds, and in that span of time, he vanishes into thin air. Now, obviously, the parents are beyond devastated. It's awful enough to lose one child, but to lose 2 is beyond imagining. The search is huge, one of the largest in state history. There are about 300 volunteers combing every inch of this park, looking for the kid. But again, there's no trace of him. The search goes on for about a week, with people looking miles from the part of the park he vanished from. And then, almost 2 weeks later, a volunteer almost 15 miles from the designated search area radios in that he's found the kid. They assume that the kid was dead, but the volunteer says he's not only alive, he's in good shape. KD and her team go out to recover the kid, and when they get there, she can't believe that this is the kid that's been missing. His clothes are clean, there's no dirt on him anywhere, and he doesn't appear traumatized. The volunteer says he found the kid sitting on a log, playing with a little twig bundle that's bound together with some old rope. KD asks him where he's been, who he was with for those 2 weeks, and the kid tells her that he's been with the fuzzy man. Now KD firmly believes in Bigfoot, so she gets all excited and asks what he means by fuzzy. Was he hairy? But the kid says no, he wasn't hairy, he was a fuzzy man, and he describes a man that's blurry, like when you close your eyes but not all the way closed. He says the man came out of the trees and took the kid with him deep into the woods. The kid says he slept in a hollow tree, and the fuzzy man gave him berries to eat. KD asks if the man was mean, if he scared the kid, and the kid says no, he wasn't scary. But I didn't like how he didn't have eyes. KD says they get the kid back to headquarters, and a cop takes him into town to talk to him more about what happened. She's friends with the cop that talked to him, and she said the kid described being kept in this tree by the fuzzy man and given berries whenever he was hungry. He was allowed to wander around a very specific clearing, but when he tried to go further, the fuzzy man would get mad and yell real loud, even though he didn't have a mouth. When the kid got scared at night, the fuzzy man made it go brighter and gave him the twig bundle. He said the fuzzy man was going to keep him, but he had to let him go because the kid wasn't the right kind. He either can't or won't elaborate more on that. The cops are just sort of left scratching their heads, and the search for his brother is renewed with no results. The kid has no idea where his brother might be, and they never find him. The last story that KD told me was of something that happened to her when she got separated from her training group when she was a rookie. They were learning the basics of high-elevation belaying on a well-mapped side of the mountain, and she had to use the bathroom. She went off about 50 yards from the group during a meal break and did her business. I'll tell the rest exactly as she told it to me. So I go to take a piss, and once I'm done, I start going back to the group. But I've only gotten about 5 feet when I realize that I have no idea where I am. And this wasn't a, oh, I got turned around, lost. I mean, I had literally no fucking clue where I was. If you'd asked me, I don't even think I'd have been able to tell you what state we were in. It was sort of how I imagine people with amnesia feel, you know? You're completely lost, and you have no idea what to do. So I stood there for a while, just trying to figure out where the fuck I was and what I was supposed to do. But the longer I stand there, the more confused and turned around I get, so I started walking. As I recall, I just picked a random direction and went for it. And as I'm walking, it's just getting worse and worse to the point where I have no concept of why I'm on the mountain in the first place. I'm just trudging through the snow, and then I start hearing this voice. It's kind of inside my head almost, like if a frog could talk, all low and croaky. And it's telling me over and over, it's okay, you just need to find something to eat. Find something to eat and you'll be okay, just keep walking and find something to eat. 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 So I start looking around for anything that I can eat, and I swear to God I've never felt that hungry in my whole life. It was bottomless, and I think I'd have eaten just about anything you put in front of me right then. I had no concept of time, so I had no idea how long I'd been out when I hear an actual voice coming toward me. I go toward it and see one of the other SARs, and he looks fucking terrified. He's running toward me asking if I'm okay and what the hell I'm doing out here. And the scary thing was, as he's running toward me, I kind of see myself reaching into my belt for my hunting knife. I'm not even really thinking about what I'm doing, but what I am thinking is that I have to eat. If I don't eat, I'll never be okay again, so I just have to eat. He sees me doing that, and he backs off right away. He yells at me to put my knife away, that he's not going to hurt me, and that kind of snaps me back. All of a sudden, I know exactly where I am, and I put the knife away. I run to him and ask him how long I've been gone, thinking he'll tell me I've been gone for half an hour or so. But he tells me I've been gone for 2 fucking days. I've gone over 2 peaks and ended up almost on the other side of the mountain, and if I'd kept going, I would have ended up wandering into about 300 miles of wilderness. They'd never have found me. He can't believe I'm not dead, and of course I don't know what the fuck to think. To me, no time has passed at all. I don't say anything, I just go back with him to a rendezvous point, and I'm taken back to HQ to be airlifted to the hospital. When I get there, they do all kinds of tests and try to figure out what happened. As best they can guess, I had some kind of weird fugue state, which is kind of like amnesia, or a weird seizure that knocked my brain out of whack. But the truth is that we really don't know. It's never happened again, but I'll tell you, ever since then I never go out there alone. People rag on me for making them come with me when I have to leave the group, but I just tell them that listening to me piss in the snow is better than losing me for 2 fucking days on a freezing mountain. EW. The next person I talked to was EW, a former trainer who now works as an EMT. He still comes to ops like this to help out, but doesn't work full-time for us anymore. He specialized in finding lost kids. He just seemed to have a sixth sense when it came to knowing where they'd gone. He's a legend among the more senior vets, but he gets embarrassed if you compliment him on his work. He sat down with me at dinner one evening, and we ended up swapping stories. Most of them were just casual. But when we got on the subject of our weirder calls, I mentioned that I'd had a buddy who'd gone up a set of stairs. He got kind of quiet and asked me if I'd heard of a little boy who'd disappeared from his park a few years back. I hadn't, so he told me this story. Cause of death as something like massive internal bleeding, but no one knows what really happened. I've never been able to forget that kid. I have nightmares about it sometimes. I don't let my kids go into the woods alone, and when we go together, I never let them out of my sight. I used to love it out here, but that case and a couple others just sort of ruined it for me. Dinner was over, so we started to clean up and go back to our cabins. Before we went our separate ways, he put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me really close. He tells me that there's bad things out here, things that don't care if we have families or lives, or that we can think and feel. He tells me to be careful, and he walks away. I didn't have a chance to talk with him again, but that story stuck with me. PB. By pure coincidence, I got to talk to another vet, PB, who's been in the SAR field for years. We were partnered on a grid sweep during a training exercise, and we were chatting casually about how we liked the job, what kinds of things we'd seen, and the like. At one point, we passed an old set of stairs, though these were probably from an old fire lookout given the area that we were in. I sort of casually mentioned that I was curious about the stairs, and that I wished I knew more about them. He got kind of quiet and looked like he wanted to tell me something, but wasn't sure if he should. Finally, he told me to turn my radio off. Obviously, this is something we are never ever supposed to do, but I did it, and he did the same. The sun came up. He said he was sick. None of us have heard from him since he left. When I started out as a rookie, no one had told me a lot about the job in terms of weird things that could happen. I'm assuming this was largely to prevent me from freaking out and abandoning the park. But a few months into my service, when I was still a rookie, a friend and I were drunk at a party and he opened up a bit. Yeah, it can get a little crazy out there, I guess. I think the worst are the ones where people die when they just shouldn't, you know? Or when we find them dead like 10 minutes after someone says they saw them last. They were fine when I passed them on the switchback, I swear. That sort of shit. Like, take this guy who I found one spring out on a really popular trail. Someone comes into the VC freaking about some guy who's lying in the middle of the path in this giant pool of blood. So we run out there, and we find this guy dead as a doornail. Which he absolutely should be, because the back of his head is like mashed potatoes. The skull is decimated, brains are leaking out like custard filling, and they guy's old, so you figure, yeah, he probably fell and hit his head. Old people fall all the time, it's no big deal. Except that this area where he fell doesn't have any big rocks. There's not even any stumps or big branches. And on top of that, there's no blood trail, so he clearly died where he dropped. Now that's when you'd turn to murder, but there were people just out of line of sight with the guy. If someone came up behind him and murdered him, there's no way someone wouldn't have heard. And again, even if someone had, there'd be a blood trail, spatter all over the place. But everyone on the scene said it looked exactly like he'd fallen and smashed his head on a rock. So what the fuck did he hit his head on? And then there was this lady I found in a different park about 5 years ago, back when I was upstate. We found her in the middle of a stand of big junipers, curled around the trunk like she was hugging it. We pick her up to move her, and a fucking waterfall comes out of her mouth, splashes all over my shoes. Her clothes are dry and her hair is dry, but the amount of water in her lungs and stomach was phenomenal. Unreal, man. Coroner's report says the cause of death was drowning. Her lungs were completely full of water. This, even though we're in the middle of the high desert, and there isn't a body of water for miles. No puddles, no nothing. No signs of anyone else being out there. I mean, yeah, it's possible they were murdered. But why go out of the way to do it like that? Why not just stab them and be done with it? I don't know. It just sits weird with me. Now, of course, that freaked me out a little. But we were wasted, and I guess I sort of wrote it off as a fluke. I also assumed there was exaggeration there since, we were wasted. Now, I don't like talking about this next case very much. It was an awful one that I've done my best to forget about, but of course that's easier said than done. This happened about 6 months after the conversation with my friend at the bar, and up until that point I hadn't had a lot of really weird shit go down. A few things here and there, and of course the stares, but it's amazingly easy to get used to stuff like that when it's treated as if it's normal. This case was a little different. A guy with Down syndrome in his 20s went missing after his family lost sight of him on a major path. That was odd in and of itself because this guy never left his mom's side. She was absolutely convinced he'd been kidnapped, and unfortunately, a ranger who isn't with the park anymore insinuated that no one was going to kidnap someone. Well, with that kind of disability. Not very tactful, to say the least. We wasted a lot of time trying to calm her down enough to get information about him, and then we put out an official missing persons call. Because of the urgency of the situation, him being mostly unable to function alone, we had local police come in and help us. We didn't find him the first night, which was heartbreaking. None of us wanted to think of him being alone out there. We assumed he'd just kept wandering and was staying ahead of us. We brought out helis the next day, and they spotted him in a little canyon. I helped bring him back up, but he was in bad shape, and I think we all knew he wasn't going to make it. He'd fallen and broken his spine, and couldn't feel his lower half. He'd also broken both his legs, one at the femur, and he'd lost a lot of blood. He was confused and scared while he was alone, so he'd probably exacerbated the injuries by dragging himself a little ways. I know it sounds awful, but while I was riding in the copter with him, I asked him why he'd wandered off. I just wanted something to tell his mother, to let her know it wasn't her fault, because he was fading fast, and I didn't think she'd get to ask him herself. He was crying, and he said something about how the little sad boy had wanted him to come play. He said the little boy wanted to trade so he could go home. Then he closed his eyes, and when he woke up again, he was in the canyon. I'm not sure that's exactly what he said, but it was what I thought the gist of it was. He kept crying, asking where his mommy was, and I held his hand and tried my best to keep him calm. It was cold out there. He kept saying that. It was cold out there. My legs was frozen. It was cold out there. It's cold in me. He was getting even weaker, so he eventually stopped talking, and he closed his eyes for a while. Then, when we were about 5 minutes from the hospital, he looked right at me, with these big tears running down his face, and he said, "Mama won't see me no more. Love Mama. Wish she was here." And he closed his eyes, and he just never woke up. It was horrible, and I don't like talking about it. That case was one of the first ones that really rattled me badly. Because of how badly it affected me, I reached out to a senior ranger, and who ended up helping me through it. As time went on, and we got to know each other better, he ended up sharing one of his own stories with me. It was disturbing, but it helped to know that I wasn't the only one affected by the things going on out there. I think this must have happened before you got here, because I think if it had happened while you were here, you'd have remembered it. I know it didn't end up in the news for some reason, but I think most people who've been here long enough know about it. The park sold off a portion of land to a logging company, and it was a really controversial thing. But it wasn't that large or old of a plot, and it was right after the recession, so we needed cash bad. Anyway, they were felling this plot of land, and we get a call that we need to get our supervisors out right away. I don't know why, but they ended up sending me and a few other guys along with the heads, I guess for power and numbers, to see what was up. We got there, and all these guys are crowded around a tree that they've just cut down. They're all pissed off and freaking out, and the foreman comes over and says he wants to know what we think we're up to. What the hell y'all think this is, some kind of sick joke? You've got a lot of fucking nerve pulling this shit. We bought this land fair and square. Well, we don't know what the hell he's talking about, so he brings us over to this felled tree and points at it and tells us that when they cut it down, it was just like this. And they'll be damned if they put it there. The inside of the tree was all rotted out and hollow in one spot, and when they'd cut it down, it had exposed that chamber, and inside it is a hand, like a perfectly severed hand, and looks like it's actually fused with the inside of the tree. Well, now we think they're pulling a joke, so we tell them that we don't like being fucked with, and we start to leave, but they tell us they've already called the cops and that they'll go right to the media if we don't stick around. Well, that gets the heads' attention, so they stick around and talk to the police about it. Everyone is denying that they put the hand in there, and besides, how would anyone have even done it? It's clearly a real hand, but it's not mummified or skeletal. It's brand new, probably not even a day old. And it is definitely fused with the wood. You can see that it's coming right out of it. The loggers, they insist that they didn't put it there. Somehow, this fresh human hand ended up fused to the inside of this living tree. The cops have them cut up that section of tree into a movable chunk. Then they take the hand away, and the area is closed off. There was a pretty big investigation, but I know they didn't get any answers. Now it's become this legend, and as far as I know, we haven't sold any more property for logging. As you all know, I went to a training seminar recently and heard some amazing and horrible things there. One of the guys I talked to while I was there told me a story when we were all around the campfire one night. We were both pretty drunk, you'll see a pattern here, and we were swapping stories. He told me this one. Me and another guy were out on a field search because some campers reported screaming noises at night. So we head out there to look for whatever fucking mountain lion has wandered into the area, and I'm pissed. We've had 3 of them show up in the camping areas that year alone, and I'm getting tired as hell of constantly having to deal with them. Plus, I just don't like them anyway. They're a pain in the ass, and they're loud and they scare the shit out of me. Fucking cats. Pieces of shit. I'm groaning about it to the guy I'm with, and he thinks it's a real fucking riot. So we're seeing all these broken branches and what look like dens, and we're pretty sure we know where this thing is. I call in, and they tell me to confirm if possible, which, just means they want you to step in a big pile of shit and use that as proof. I'm not seeing any though, so I basically just tell them to shove it. I'm done. We know that damn thing's out here somewhere, even if I'm not stepping in its shit or inside its mouth or whatever. Guy I'm with wanders off to take a piss or whatever, and I stay behind watching this little burrow under a tree to see if maybe a fox or something is living under it, 'cause I love foxes, man. They're cute as hell. But anyway, I'm watching this tree, and I start hearing branches crackling, and it's coming from the direction my partner went opposite of. Now I've got my pistol, but you and I both know that's not gonna do shit against a cat. I cock it and holler for my partner to get his dumb ass back, but he's too far and he can't hear me. I stand up and get my sights on where the thing is approaching, and I shit you not, man, I just about peed myself. This guy is coming toward me, and he's backflipping through the fucking woods. Like, instead of walking, he's doing these crazy fucking backflips, and I swear to God, he cleared every fucking log and bush in his path. It was like he knew right where he was going. I yell at the guy to stop right where he is, that I'm pointing a gun right at him, but he keeps coming, and I just kinda lost it. I shot at the ground in front of him, and it was a dumb fucking thing to do, but man, I didn't want this guy anywhere near me. When I fired, he was about 50 yards from me, and as soon as the gun goes off, he whirls around and goes off, back-flipping back into the woods. My partner hears my gun go off and runs back and asks what's up, and I tell him there's some fucking weirdo out here hopped up on God knows what, and we need to get the hell out of Dodge. I let the cops know what happened, and I didn't get in any trouble for firing, but man, I don't know what that motherfucker was on, but I've never seen anything like that before. Shit was absolutely buttfuck crazy. I think we can agree that there's stuff going on out here in the woods, And while I'm not going to spout off about what it could be, or offer any theories, what I want people to take away from all of this is that it is so damn important to be safe when you're out there. I know a lot of you think you're invincible, but the fact is that you can die out there, or be hurt, or go missing. It's easier than you'd ever imagine. Things have deteriorated here to a degree that I didn't foresee. I didn't know how much writing about the things that are happening out here would affect every single part of my life. And maybe that was stupid of me. Maybe I should have considered it more seriously, but honestly I just thought I was writing about things that a few people would want to hear. I didn't think it would get this much attention. People ask me about the stairs now. It doesn't happen every day, but when it does happen, I never really know what to say. My bosses know someone is talking about them, and I'm sure that if they know, the higher-ups know. And I can tell you that they aren't happy about it. I've been formally told that I am not to speak a word about them to anyone anymore, which is part of the reason this has to be my final update. I can't risk my job for this. As much as it's been wonderful to get a lot of these things off my mind, I still do love my work, and I need to be out here. If anything, my being aware of what's really going on is enough reason to stick it out. I may not be able to tell people that they're out there, but if I see them, I can direct traffic away to somewhere safer. Because of the amount of attention the stories have gotten, I've heard a lot of stories being swapped back and forth. I've heard so many I can't even remember most of them. The ones I do remember are the ones that I wish I could forget. One story that's made the rounds here was about a young woman who disappeared upstate. Initially, everyone assumed she was a runaway. She didn't come from a great home life, and so it really wasn't any kind of surprise that she'd choose to cut and run. But people started coming forward saying that they'd seen her around the park shortly before she vanished, so some of the rangers in the area were sent out to make sure she hadn't hung herself or something on any of the back trails. It took them a while, but they did find her. Well, not all of her. Just half of her tongue and a quarter of the lower jaw. Very clean cuts from what I heard. They've never found the rest of her. So many stories about children, so many of them going missing and turning up in caves, wedged in between impossibly tight spaces. So many of them found on mountain peaks or at the bottoms of sheer gullies. Missing shoes, missing socks, or found with both in perfect condition despite them being miles and miles away from where they vanished. So many stories of black-eyed people wandering around the woods and calling out in the night, mimicking the sound of running water or a bobcat screaming. One man in particular goes to every news station he thinks will listen to him and tells the same story. He was deer hunting, had camped out in a very remote area, and woke up because something was scraping against his tent. He thought it was a raccoon or a fox until the thing pressed its face against the door of the tent, at which point he could very clearly make out a human nose and mouth. He kicked at it, but it leapt back and was gone by the time he opened the tent flap, gun at his side. He fired 2 warning shots, and when the sound had faded, he heard a snap behind him. A man was standing at the edge of the campsite. This man was not wearing any clothing, but he also didn't possess any kind of human flesh. As this hunter described it, the man was made of some kind of amalgamation of raw meat and hair, as if someone had scooped up roadkill and molded it into the vague shape of a man. The face was lumpy and only a rough approximation of a human face. The thing opened its lopsided mouth, and from it came the sound of the gun the hunter had fired. It did this twice before mimicking the sound of the tent zipper and fleeing into the night. A young couple, out for a hike in the rocky areas of my park, reported to me yesterday that they had seen something strange out on a peak I'm very familiar with. They were taking turns looking through a pair of binoculars when the man noticed a hiker climbing up a very steep part of the cliff face. He watched the man scale the slope, and it didn't occur to him until the incident was over that this person had no climbing gear. When the climber reached the top of the peak, which was about 5 miles away, they turned and faced the young man. He said whoever, or whatever this person was looking right at them. The climber waved in an exaggerated manner before snapping in half at the waist, sideways, and leaping off the peak. The young man didn't see where the climber landed. I sent them on their way with assurances that I'd check it out. I lied. I won't be turning in a report because there are 10 others exactly like it. The climber is well known in that area. I don't question it anymore. There are so many things I won't ever be able to understand about my job, and it would take me years to relate all of the things I've heard in the last few months. When I feel like my job isn't in jeopardy, I will come back. It may be in a different format, but I will come back. Thank you all for sticking by my side and enjoying the things I've talked about. If you go out into the woods, I encourage you to be safe. Bring water, food, survival equipment. Let people know where you're going and when you'll be back. Don't go on uncharted paths unless you know exactly what you're doing. And above all, don't touch them. Don't look at them. Don't go up them.